Bro, how come no one talks about Bakugan anymore? This anime was literally an interdimensional war with little monsters that jumped out of your hand and turned into giant dragons out of nowhere. If you lived through the hype, you know, every recess turned into a tournament, with honor, cookies, and sometimes even fists on the line. Each season got crazier than the last. New characters, insane plot twists, and Bakugans that just kept getting more overpowered. But behind all the explosions and yelling, there's a story that goes way beyond Dan and Drago taking on the villain of the week. We're talking betrayal, time travel, collapsing planets, and even a cosmic entity that plays Bakugan better than anyone else. So in today's video, I'm breaking down everything, absolutely everything, from episode 1 to 189. No skips. If you were ever hooked on this show, or just want to understand where this beautiful chaos came from, buckle up. This ride's gonna be long and packed with nostalgia. Let's go.
You gotta fight for what's right before it's gone. This is Bakugan.
It all started on an ordinary day, until cards began falling from the sky. Yes, cards. And no, nobody thought about running or taking cover, because apparently, logic had already packed its bags and left this universe. All it took was someone to toss one of them on the ground and poof, giant monsters ready to brawl appeared. Just your average Tuesday. Dan Kuso, your classic main character with the energy of 5 espressos, rounds up an online crew: Runo, Marucho, Julie, Shun, and Alice. And just like that, they invent a game with these beastly creatures. What could possibly go wrong, right? Spoiler alert, everything. In one of his first battles, Dan goes up against Shuji, a strategic genius, according to himself, and gets his butt handed to him. But then comes the moment where my life just turned into an anime. Drago, Dan's Bakugan, actually talks to him. Yep, the dragon opens his mouth and starts going off about an interdimensional war. Just like that, the little game becomes a full-blown reality war. Ever seen that before? Well, now you have.
My ears aren't playing tricks on me.
Dan is determined to prove to the world that his Bakugan can talk. Of course, Drago decides to stay silent. Meanwhile, over in Vestroia, Naga, a villain with a textbook villain complex, is trying to absorb the energy of the universe. That's when Masquerade enters the scene, a masked player who looks like a cosplay villain straight out of an RPG. And he doesn't mess around. He uses Doom cards that banish Bakugan to oblivion.
I want my Bakugan back!
Sorry, but no can do.
Runo is the first to feel the heat. She loses her Tigrera and most of her patience. Fired up, Dan challenges Masquerade, but instead gets the Shuji and Akira brothers. Mid-battle, Drago decides it's time to evolve, transforming into an even more powerful beast. They win the match. But then, the real villain finally shows up, just to humiliate Dan. He crushes him with a Doom card and vanishes, leaving behind a motivational note. You've got potential, but you're still a weakling.
I will remember young Dan Kuso and his Bakugan Drago.
Later on, Dan goes full crazy gym coach mode, pushing Drago to train until he's about to explode. Poor Drago even tries to warn him. This is about more than just winning a little game, buddy. But Dan, with the emotional maturity of a rock, just brushes it off. Enter Ricky Maru, the player who made a deal with the devil. During the battle, Ricky sacrifices his own Bakugan just to activate a Doom card. What kind of human being does that to his own little monsters? Dan wins, but the victory feels like eating dirt. Drago bursts with rage and delivers the speech. My friends were banished, and you're out here acting like it's just a board game. Dan, in response, does what any unhinged teenager would do, throws Drago into a river, just because. Still, Dan tries to pretend everything's fine, but he looks like an extra in an Avril Lavigne music video. Runo delivers a reality check. You don't know what you've got until it's gone. Touche. Meanwhile, Ryo, a genius nerd with an ego the size of Google, is manipulated by Masquerade. He gets a Bakugan and a Doom card, and decides to challenge Dan, and without Drago, Dan's just a background character in his own story. Cue the redemption arc moment. Dan runs to the river, begs for forgiveness with tears in his eyes, and Drago, like any good protagonist who's been wronged, forgives him. But there's a catch. This time, it's a true partnership. In the rematch, Dan and Drago show what real teamwork looks like: sync, strategy, and a dash of heroic redemption. They win, and even manage to pull a smile from Ryo, who becomes the latest convert to anime-style friendship fanaticism. Cut to another moment. The day's barely started, and Dan is already deep in infinite snooze mode. Meanwhile, the whole crew's hyped up on the group call, celebrating Drago's return after that drama by the river. But of course, Runo couldn't resist a jab. She gleefully reminded everyone how Dan nearly lost his Bakugan thanks to his good old stubborn streak. Peace? Not even at a Sunday fair fair. Dan's mom bursts in with a life-or-death mission. Meat sale. Dan heads out looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Yes, even at the dentist. Cut to 2 innocent kids playing Bakugan. Enter the local bully with a PhD in ruining everyone's fun. But hold up, the karma arrives wearing a mask. Masquerade steps out from the shadows, Doom card in hand. What follows is a toy massacre. Reaper sends everyone to the Doom dimension, and the villain vanishes into the mist like he's Sasuke. Meanwhile, in Runo's world, boredom hits hard at her parents' cafe. Meat sale, she bites too. The result? An unexpected run-in with Dan at the market. Rom-com vibes backed by bakery ambiance. They schedule a battle, but on the way out, Dan drops his Bakugan, along with a not-so-friendly invite. Masquerade wants a showdown at the river, alone, but Runo, impulsive, bold, and all heart. She heads to the river in Dan's place. Waiting there is a guy one meltdown away from villain monologue. The battle kicks off, Juggernaut hits the field, and becomes a joke. The opponent goes full cheap shot mode with a broken combo, and Runo takes hit after hit until she remembers Tigrera. Then the tide turns, strategy kicks in, combos worthy of a world championship, and victory comes through smarts. Dan watches from the sidelines, totally awestruck by his friend's skills. At the amusement park, Dan's craving adrenaline, Runo's looking for something chill, totally normal, but what starts as a harmless outing quickly spirals into a trap when 2 shady magicians hit the stage, the Kent and Kenji brothers. Spoiler alert, they're actually Masquerade's goons in disguise, posing as second-rate illusionists. They challenge Dan and Runo to a tag battle. Dan obviously says yes, because he follows his heart, not his head. The result? His griffin gets wiped out in no time. Runo tries to hold her ground with Serpenoid, but gets hit with a level down that still stings. He comes back with Saurus, hoping to turn the tide, but the brothers keep pulling tricks out of their hat. Opposing attributes, random boosts, defeat feels inevitable. Backed into a corner, the duo decides to go all in. Dan, Runo, and an extra Bakugan drop 3 at once onto the field, a justified last-ditch move. The comeback is real when Tigrera returns, summoned with the cut and save card. Final result, Drago and the crew blow those wannabe magicians off the stage. And finally, Runo drags Dan onto the Ferris wheel. Small victories count too. But now, is there a new skyscraper in town? Mysterious. But not for long. It's Marucho's brand new home. That's right. Turns out the kid's a billionaire and lives in a full-on amusement park with Wi-Fi password access. A VIP party kicks off, featuring none other than Dan's mom and even folks who've never played Bakugan before. The night's big surprise? Jenny and Jules, 2 pop stars who are also brawlers. And of course, they're working for Masquerade. Amid the glitz and glam, the duo challenges Dan and Marucho. The battle begins with Marucho unleashing his star Bakugan, Preyas, the attribute-swapping chameleon.
Aqua's Preyas has arrived!
Jenny and Jules play tough, but Preyas is clever. He changes elements mid-fight, throwing everyone off balance. Everything seems to be heading toward victory. It's only when Jenny and Jules finally come clean that things get wild. They're actually good, really good, and they banish one of Dan's Bakugan straight to the Doom dimension. Dan is shaken. Marucho sets up a triangle defense using fire, water, and light. Bold move, like 4D chess. At the crucial moment, Preyas switches attributes and flips the game, but the pop stars go full diva, bending rules, summoning tsunamis, and turning the battlefield into a rave of chaos. Drago comes in blazing and gets a massive 420 G-power boost. The comeback moment? Dan plays a card that reverses attributes, a masterstroke. The result? A Drago plus Preyas combo hitting 1020 Gs. Total domination, and the pop stars, totally unfazed. They've got another gig tonight, but Drago uses the post-battle moment to drop a bombshell. He's from Vestroya, where a Bakugan named Naga tried to steal the Infinity Core and caused a collapse that shook even our reality. More plot twists? The human who helped Naga might just be none other than scientist Dr. Michael Gehbech, who mysteriously vanished. Hal G, his dark alter ego, having a grim chat with Masquerade. The vibe now? End of the world level serious. Another day, another round of training. Tactics here, combos there, but Miu, frozen, motionless, staring into the void like someone waiting on a crush who's ghosted them for good. Her brother, Makoto, and who shows up to stir the pot and mess with her emotions even more? None other than the dark pimp himself, Masquerade, with a smug little smile and a bundle of cursed cards. The offer? Any wish granted. The cost? Just her dignity. Meanwhile, Alice, the Russian doll who doesn't fight but sees everything, returns bearing a gift, a battle simulator, because nothing says friendship like a war power upgrade. And as a bonus, apocalyptic visions featuring a certain Michael and a world-ending prophecy. Totally normal. With Dan stranded at some airport, it's up to Runo and Marucho to handle Takashi and Kazuki. The battle? Brutal. The twist? The two start brawling mid-duel, and Alice figures it out. Cheap trick to banish Bakugans into the void. And all of it, just to get Makoto's attention. Yeah, great plan. If you're trying to fail, Miyu snaps, breaks down. My brother loved Bakugan, he would never approve of this. And for the first time, two antagonists come to their senses, tear up their doom cards, and vow to do better. Hope is reborn. And Dan finally escapes the airport, runs into a mysterious kid. A few words are exchanged. Surprise, it was Makoto. Yeah, the universe has a funny way of playing things. So, Julie got beat up, literally. Then Billy, her old childhood crush, rolls in with a talking Bakugan and totally humiliates her. And to make matters worse, apparently everyone's got a chatty Bakugan now. And like any good protagonist who makes bad decisions out of loneliness, she heads straight for the infamous Bakugan Valley, a place darker than Twitter on Drama Day. But she goes anyway, because she wants someone. Anyone. Even an alien. And who does she find? Gorum. A Subterra beast with barbecue dad vibes but a heart of gold. And the two of them connect. Yeah, in that cheesy but it works kind of way. Julie's got herself a partner now. The next day, rematch with Billy. He laughs, typical jerk move. But this time, Julie's got an ace up her sleeve. Gorum steps in with the defense of a tank, and together, they prove that real connection beats showing off any day. Julie introduces Gorum to the Brawlers, and for the first time, she doesn't feel like the odd one out. Right after that, Runo's itching for a fight, but Dan steps in and battles in her place and wins, then forgets everything right after. Classic Goldfish memory. Amid the chaos, there's still a missing piece in the Brawlers puzzle, Darkus and Ventus. In other words, Shun's vanished, but Dan freaks out just hearing the name. Runo and Marucho ignore his meltdown and go looking for the ninja boy. Instead, they run into his grandfather, a grumpy old man with zero patience, kicks everyone out, but oops, accidentally activates a battlefield. Nice going, Gramps. Eventually they find Shun, cold, distant, antisocial at a don't want friends, just peace level. But he agrees on one condition. If they beat him 2-on-1, he'll rejoin the team. The battle begins. Shun plays like a strategist, using Skyrus and Falconeer like he's playing 3D chess. But Runo and Marucho aren't amateurs. Preyas shifts attribute and flips the match. Shun won and is heading straight to find Dan. But Dan, still on the run from the ninja, and the tension's rising. And that unresolved past? Yeah, it's gonna blow up soon. Marucho's hiding secrets, Runo's haunted by nightmares, and Dan, he's plummeting in the rankings like a rock. From 97th place, he watches Shun climb all the way to the top 6. Masquerade, still undefeated. Dan and Shun's friendship? It used to be beautiful. They made up their own rules, pulled off wild, improvised attacks, until Shun started disappearing. I have to go, he'd say, then vanish. Classic. And then the bomb drops. Shun's mom is hospitalized. His grandfather wants him to give everything up and become a true ninja. Tradition versus Bakugan, straight out of a Japanese drama. Dan pushes for a battle. Shun's clearly avoiding it, but Dan snaps, "You're just using this as an excuse to run from life." And you know what? He kind of has a point. Later at the hospital, Shun's mother gives him a gift, a Bakugan. She wants him to follow his heart, and just like that, he decides to fight. Meanwhile, Masquerade is setting up his final move. The target? Dan. The goal? Destroy Drago. And to do it, he's recruiting someone very special. Someone no one would ever suspect. The tension's thick in the Brawlers' room. Runo, serving snacks like they're laced with emotional landmines, throws passive-aggressive jabs at Dan, who, naturally, is as oblivious as a Marvel vigilante with a blindfold. Truth is, she's fuming over how all the attention, especially Dan's, who's got the emotional radar of a toaster, is drifting toward Alice. And to top off this rotten cake, Dan finds out Alice and Marucho paid a sneaky visit to Shun's house. The result? Shun slammed the door on their offer to help. Once the gossip explodes, it's pure chaos. Runo loses it, Dan claps back, and they almost throw down right then and there, doom cards in hand. Runo drops the mic. Good luck with Masquerade then. So much for teamwork. But the plot doesn't let up. Off they go, to Shun's place. And who's out in the yard like he owns the chaos? That's right, Masquerade. Destiny cards activated. The rule for this round is simple. If you lose, your Bakugan will be banished to the eternal void. Dan faces off against Laserman and loses hard. Shun steps in with Monoris, soaring like a SWAT hawk, but even that's not enough. Hydronoid enters the arena, blasting in with a whopping 450 Gs.
Hydronoid stand!
And then, drama. Drago's just about to check into the Doom dimension when Shun hurls Minaris in to take the hit. A sacrifice no one saw coming, but it reignites that good old brawler bond. Masquerade, not to be outdone, annihilates his own ally with Third Judgment, because a real villain eliminates everyone, teammates included. The final straw, Shun climbs off the fence. Enough, I'm back, let's take this lunatic down. And just like that, it's a buddy battle. Shun and Dan sync up like a margarine commercial and take down Hydronoid. Masquerade retreats. But just when it looked like the end, brace yourself. Here comes the twist. Alice gathers the whole gang to drop a truth bomb. Even Agent Mulder would roll his eyes at. Michael Gahabich, the missing scientist? Yeah.
You know that missing scientist, Michael Gahabik? Well, he's my grandfather.
The very same guy who vanished the day Bakugan started falling from the sky like infinity stones. They jet off to Moscow, sneak into Grandpa's secret lab, and find out he basically ripped open a black hole to Vestroia, like opening the fridge door and accidentally unleashing a dragon. The result? Michael's now Hal G, a name dripping with more evil than your average anime villain. And of course, Hal G is teaming up with Masquerade. Both are after the Infinity Core, because apparently world domination is this season's hottest hobby. New mission on the table. Head to the Bakugan Valley, because where there's mystery, there's a brawler diving in head first. Arriving at the Bakugan Valley, the vibe is already full-on reality warping. The whole place feels like it's picking up a signal from Vestroia through some kind of madness satellite dish. But the real bomb drops when Billy shows up. Former friend, former crush, and now Masquerade's brand new lapdog. Alongside him is Kamba, another one who's been corrupted like a small-town politician. The showdown kicks off with Shun taking on Billy, while Julie is left trying to process the fact that her past flame is now a full-blown villain's henchman. Gorham steps onto the battlefield, but things quickly go downhill. Then, plot twist. Minaris gets sacrificed yet again. Seriously, that Bakugan's insurance plan must be bleeding out by now. At the climax, Shun unleashes Gorham for a spectacular finish that obliterates Cycloid. The heroes score a win, but Julie suffers an emotional KO, collapsing into tears with a gut punch of a line. He was my friend.
It can't end this way!
So, how are things at Brawler Base? Emotional funeral vibes. Julie's in mourning, but the drama GPS points to a canyon where the Infinity Core might be. Enter Chen Li, world's third-ranked player and clearly rocking an ego as big as the Doom card she activates. Dan, ever the hothead, decides to face her solo. Chen Li summons her Bakugan, sets a trap, revives a defeated beast with her Revive card. But Dan pulls out the Sling Blazer card, and right after that, unleashes a fusion ability that makes Drago blast through reinforced steel. Drago hits 530 Gs. Result? Fortress crumbles to dust. Chen Li concedes defeat but drops a cryptic hint. Fortress still has a secret, and the cherry on top? Someone's leaking info to the villains. Shun reveals the canyon trip was a test, and the traitor might be Webmaster Joe, the guy who runs the Brawlers website. The search for the Infinity Core is starting to feel like chasing Wi-Fi in a coffee shop. Everyone's looking, no one's finding. Dan, the group's walking nerve bundle, freaks out. We've searched everywhere and found nothing. Cue the teenage drama. Enter Marucho, the team's blonde angel. Instead of punching walls or launching Bakugan into the void, what does he do? Makes takoyaki. That's right, the kid goes full MasterChef Bakugan edition with Preyas as his sous chef. But peace in anime lasts about as long as a Black Friday deal. Dan decides to post a help request on their website. Runo flashes the "this is a terrible idea" sign, but he goes through with it anyway. And because life loves to reward questionable choices, some guy named Klaus from Germany shows up offering info if they agree to a face-to-face. They arrive in Germany, and the setting already screams bad vibes. A gothic castle straight out of Cheek Dracula magazine. Klaus von Hertzen, their host, looks like he just stepped out of a high-end cologne commercial. Polite, elegant, and obviously shady. He wants to battle the Brawlers. If he loses, he'll spill the secrets. Marucho agrees. Spoiler, he shouldn't have. Klaus summons Cyranoid to the arena, a Bakugan that sings, hypnotizes, and finishes by sending you to the Doom dimension. With moves like Dive Mirage and the eerie Muse ability card, he plays dirty with style. Preyas holds on as long as he can, but when he looks at Marucho and whispers, "I can't stop," bro, a nation wept.
I can't stop myself!
Preyas falls. Marucho screams. Klaus goes full soap opera villain, blame your own weakness, and poof. Klaus vanishes into a black hole, and Marucho and Runo go after him. So Dan and Julie suddenly realize Marucho and Runo are missing. Yup, this group gets lost more often than kids in a shopping mall. Meanwhile, the two missing teammates wake up in a castle with major Inception vibes. Everything looks normal, but something's definitely off. Marucho, still mourning the loss of Preyas, doesn't even get a moment to grieve. Life doesn't wait for therapy. They stumble upon a hall with a Bakugan ranking that looks more like the Forbes list. Then Tigrera enters with the wisdom of the day. The more they battle, the stronger they become, but also the closer they get to death. Enter Julio Santana, the king of ego and dirty tricks. He challenges Runo and Dan, who showed up out of nowhere, and unleashes Tentacula, a loud, ugly, and powerful Bakugan. He pulls moves like Flare Blinder to blind his opponents, Chaos Stasis to cheat using old cards, and finishes with Final Judgment, which basically sends everyone to the doomed dimension. Runo is about to lose when Drago, in a full-on Tournament of Power Goku moment, awakens his true strength. Instead of weakening under the energy blast, he evolves, majestic like a fusion between a Digimon and a legendary Pokemon. Drago takes the win effortlessly. Julio is stunned. The group regroups, wiser, more battle-hardened, and finally realizing they're not just in a school tournament, they're in the middle of a war. Meanwhile, Marucho is having a nightmare about Preyas. You know those dreams where you wake up thinking, today's gonna suck? Yeah, one of those. Dan gathers the team. Hydranoid is on the verge of becoming the ultimate Bakugan. If Masquerade gets his hands on the Infinity Core, it's game over. They need to make Drago evolve fast, but Marucho can't remember Masquerade's European hideout, and Dan, subtle as a freight train, pins the blame on him. Runo blows up, and Julie, who'd been suffering quietly in the corner over Billy, finally decides to take action. She leaves with Dan to try and save Billy. Dan, stuck in mission over emotions mode, suggests leaving Marucho behind, and just like that, the group splits. Julie finds Billy on a soccer field, but he's like a ranking zombie, obsessed with climbing the leaderboards. Their battle is painful, physically and emotionally. She tries to reach him by reminding him of their childhood toy. He hesitates, but Masquerade's voice is louder. Even with Gorham barely standing, Julie refuses to run. She'd rather be banished than abandon her partner. And that's what brings Billy back. The brainwashing breaks. He finally stands up to Masquerade for the first time, because true friendship beats even a ranking algorithm. Julie's victory shakes things up, but internal tension is turning into a pressure cooker ready to blow. Billy drops a bomb. Masquerade is operating in a dimension called Destroyer, and Naga, the creepy big boss, is there. But what really freaks him out is the negative energy in that place. Shun, ever the lone wolf ninja, says he'd rather fight solo. He tries the whole lone path thing. Then Alice shows up, just like that ex-crush you blocked, only to later realize, wait, was I the problem all along? Enter Kamba, back for revenge. Shun doesn't flinch, accepts the challenge. With surgical precision, he wipes the floor with him, then drops some wisdom at the end. Kamba, who just wanted a brawl, now begs to be trained. Shun sees a mirror of his younger self and realizes, maybe he needs the others more than he admits. Dan shows up, humble. He apologizes. They bury the hatchet with laughs, Kamba begging to become his apprentice, and one big lingering mystery. How the hell did Klaus bring Preyas back from the Doom dimension? Yup, hell will freeze over before these kids catch a break. The mask begins to crack. Under pressure from all sides, Masquerade is met with Naga's chilling sermon. Nothing is going as planned. The Dragonoid is now basically a Super Saiyan. The Infinity Core is more elusive than dignity on a reality show, and chaos is about to explode in his face. The result? The masked clown has to step down from the VIP box and get his hands dirty. Meanwhile, in Kenya, the mood is light. For a second, Kamba says his goodbyes and heads off to take care of his own path, but the truce doesn't even last 3 minutes of screen time. Klaus, Julio, and Chen crash the party, thirsty for payback, and the trio dives into a tense 3 versus 3 battle, where even breathing wrong could cost them. Things go off the rails when Klaus drops the devil's card, Preyas, but not the cute, funny Preyas. This one is charged with dark energy and doesn't even recognize his own reflection. Poor Marucho watches his former partner turn into a monster before his eyes. Dan and Runo start bickering mid-fight. Marucho, with the patience of someone who's seen it all, forces them to work together. And then, right in the heat of battle, the miracle happens. Drago changes, and not just metaphorically. His body morphs, energy spikes, and out comes Delta Dragonoid.
Iris Delta Dragonoid!
Amped with dimensional steroids that shoot him up to a whopping 1,830 Gs. Victory? Yes, but it tastes bitter. Freed from Masquerade's influence, Klaus makes a rare decision. He gives Preyas back to Marucho, a small act of redemption in the middle of the chaos. In the end, the group has more questions than answers, especially about Joe, the mysterious webmaster, who might be more than just a spectator. In Cure City, the truth finally has a face. Joe isn't just a nickname on some obscure forum. He's a real boy, fragile, yet resolute. On On the hospital rooftop, Dan hears from Joe how Bakugan.com was born, a distraction created during his fight against illness. Despite his weakness, Joe insists on a match. For the first time he truly plays. He loses, but smiles. For the first time, he felt the game pulse beyond the screen. But emotion has its price. Joe collapses, and at the hospital the pieces start to fall into place. He was never allied with Masquerade. On the contrary, he was the one sending encrypted messages to warn players about the masked villain. Then, in a dream that feels almost prophetic, Joe reveals he's met Wyvern. Yes, Naga's twin sister. And yes, she holds the Infinity Core. The core isn't lost. Joe is officially welcomed into the team, taking on the mission to track Wyvern. But the joy is short-lived. If Joe wasn't the traitor, then someone else among them is leaking information. Later, Alice runs into Christopher, a traumatized boy left behind by his own pride after being publicly humiliated by the bully Travis. She offers to help, but on one condition: he has to believe in himself, no leaning on others. The rematch begins, and in the middle of the fight, time glitches. Alice pulls Christopher into a parallel dimension, a kind of multiversal therapy session, but the spell breaks, and he's left alone, on the brink of another defeat. Only this time, something changes. Christopher finds his center, Juggernaut awakens, and together, they become one. It's the kind of victory that matters more off the scoreboard. As new players rise, so does the darkness. Runo and Tigrera stumble upon an uncomfortable truth. The traitor might be one of them. Trust is becoming a rare currency, and it's starting to crack. And amid this ever-growing cast, the Brawlers still have no idea just how close the enemy really is. Meanwhile, Dan, with that signature enthusiasm only he can pull off, decided to turn the park into a battlefield. But his plan for extreme fun had the opposite effect. It scared off the kids and made the atmosphere tenser than a condo board meeting. Runo, more on edge than usual, started sniffing out betrayal. She suspected someone was playing both sides, and the name that kept echoing in her mind was Alice. Too discreet, too observant, and never joined a battle. For Runo, that screamed suspicious with a capital S. Julie, on the other hand, didn't hesitate. The traitor had to be shunned. Her response? She stormed into Marucho's house in a style that blended Mission Impossible with slapstick comedy. Amid this comedy of errors, a shadowy figure appeared outside. Julie lunged, but got no answers. And as if things weren't chaotic enough, the Shuji and Akira brothers showed up with Mene, ready to cause mayhem. When Dan found himself cornered, the one who stepped in was none other than Alice. And surprise, she had no Bakugan. Her weapon? Strategy. Guiding Runo as if she were moving pieces on a chessboard, Alice predicted cards, anticipated moves, and dismantled the rival trio with surgical precision. It was a victory, but it didn't bring relief. On the contrary, the tension only grew, especially after Marucho discovered his files had been hacked. Strategies, confidential data, all copied. The real spy was still out there, so it finally happened. Runo couldn't take the pressure anymore. Torn between guilt and fear, she did the unthinkable. She announced she was out. She hung up her Bakugans and said goodbye to the team. Dan was in shock. At a time like this, with Masquerade dominating the battlefield, it couldn't be real. But Masquerade didn't stop. It was like he was erasing Dan's past one by one. First Chen, then Julio, and with every win, Hydronoid's hunger only grew. The creature evolved into something even more monstrous, Dual Hydronoid, and no one could stop it. Meanwhile, Runo was struggling to sleep, haunted by nightmares. Her real fear wasn't losing. It was seeing Tigrera banished to the Doom Dimension. That fate was just too cruel for her to bear. Then came Klaus, brave, daring, but completely unprepared for the monster Masquerade had unleashed. Cyranoid was obliterated, and Klaus was left shattered.
Goodbye, Klaus. I will never forget you.
Dan knew he was next, but instead of running, he faced the inevitable. The challenge was accepted. It was time for the final showdown. In an arena forgotten by time, Dan came face to face with Masquerade. This was it, all or nothing. The final round, and both of them knew it. The battle started evenly matched, but then, Dual Hydronoid showed why his name struck fear into anyone who heard it. With every strike, he left more destruction in his wake. Feeling the pressure, Drago evolved right then and there. From the flames, Delta Dragonoid was born. Now it was true power against true power. The clash turned into a spectacle, strategy, strength, and emotion unfolding in real time. Just when it seemed Dan had found the path to victory, Masquerade played his final card, Destruction Impact, a dirty move. It brought Drago down in a way that looked irreversible. At the turning point, with Drago about to be banished to the Doom Dimension, Dan did something unthinkable. He jumped in after him. He refused to abandon his partner.
Farewell, my friend.
Wait for me!
the arena fell silent, and Masquerade just laughed. What is this place? Dan and Drago had awakened in a nightmare built from defeat, the dimension of perdition, where Bakugans go to die, a place where hope comes to wither. Even far away, Dan's absence left a void everyone could feel. His mother searched for answers. Runo, trapped in her own lie, clung to a version of events that only deepened the pain. The brawlers knew the truth. Dan had sacrificed himself for them, and the guilt was unbearable. Amid the ruins, Dan heard tales of the 6 legendary soldiers, heroes who once saved Vestroya. Now, with Naga threatening everything, maybe it was time for new heroes to rise. Meanwhile, Shun faced a challenge from Masquerade, but before he could respond, something unbelievable happened. The Bakugans themselves took action. Tigrera, Preyas, Skyres, and Gorum journeyed alone to the dimension of perdition, a sacrifice that spoke louder than any speech. Unable to maintain her charade any longer, Rudo made the decision everyone had hoped for. She came out of retirement and went all in. Alongside her friends, she crossed the portal, and Alice stayed behind, alone, with too many truths to bear. Crossing into the Doom dimension was like accepting an invite to crash in a serial killer's basement. Dark, oppressive, and carrying that unmistakable "I'm never making it back" scent. Still, Julie marched forward with the fearlessness of someone who's never read a warning label. The rest of the team, putting on a brave face, but sweating harder than a latex cosplayer in summer. Enter Dan, our favorite grumpy hero, dousing the mood with a bucket of cold reality. His warm welcome, a blunt,
Aw man, I can't believe you guys are such complete idiots!
Not much time to dwell on that though, because the legendary 6 soldiers of Vestroya decided to make a dramatic entrance, all dressed up like mystical gatekeepers. They offered help, of course, but in exchange for trials that felt straight out of a supernatural reality show. Dan, never one to leave a challenge unchallenged, threw in a wild card. He demanded the release of every Bakugan trapped in the dimension, and just like that, the horror marathon began. The first test subject is none other than Julie herself. She was thrown into a haunted replica of the house where she grew up, where even the wallpaper looked like it was judging her life choices. Clay, the Subterra soldier, was pulling the strings, but it was the appearance of Daisy, the perfect sister, the childhood trauma, the mirror of insecurity, that really hit the nerve. Julie was forced to relive her ultimate humiliation, being shamed at the school talent show. Piece by piece, she began to fall apart, but then Gorum, her trusty Bakugan/therapist, offered a truth bomb. Daisy was never the real rival. The battle had always been in the mirror, and with that epiphany, Julie was reborn. Gorem evolved into Subterra Hammer Gorum,
I am now Subterra Hammer Gorum.
crushed the illusion, and sealed the first trial as a win. And Julie, for the first time in ages, she breathed like someone who finally knew who she was. On the other side, Marucho landed in the middle of nowhere, literally, a soul-melting desert and a stranger dying of thirst, because of course there's never a shortage of drama. Marucho, being the angel he is, decides to help. Naturally, that leads to more trouble than a DIY bomb tutorial on YouTube. The thirsty one? Frosh, an Aqua soldier, and that was just the warm-up. The real challenge was facing his former self, the Marucho of blind obedience and a life wrapped in plastic. And worse yet, this clone from the past was a genius at predicting his every move. Born from all the fears Marucho had never dared to admit, rage boiled over. Frustration spilled out. But it was Preyas, that Bakugan somewhere between court jester and spiritual guru, who brought the light. He reminded Marucho that the old version of himself existed out of love, a deep desire to be accepted, and that was okay. That's when Marucho broke free from himself. Preyas evolved into Preyas Angelo,
Aquas Preyas Angelo!
mastering the game with the grace of someone who knows that forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about surviving. On Shun's side, the fandom's favorite silent and tormented ninja woke up in a picture-perfect margarine commercial town. Everything was flawless. A still orange sky, a cute kid wanting to play, all just a little off. The twist? The little girl was actually an avatar of Shun's mother, manipulated by Oberus, a darkest soldier who thought it fitting to trap the boy in the cruelest emotional snare imaginable. What did Oberus want? He wanted Shun to give up on the present, to live forever in a painless illusion. But Skyres, the Bakugan that resembles a wise, majestic bird, lit the way. Those who truly love do not imprison. Thus, Skyres transformed into Storm Skyres.
She has become Storm Skyrus!
slicing through the sky with the strength of one unafraid of grief. The illusion shattered. Shun cried for the first time he could remember, and the sun finally moved. Runo was alone in a forest straight out of a gothic fairy tale. And as if things weren't weird enough already, guess who shows up? Dan. But not the Dan she knew, a younger, annoying version of him. Like that childhood crush who made you cry in public, and you still don't understand why. That memory? Totally real. A humiliating scene at the park, forever branded onto Runo's wounded ego. And who's guiding her through this emotional roller coaster? A witch, who, of course, turns out to be Lars Lion, Chaos Soldier in disguise. The battle? A duel with her own pride. Tigrera, her loyal partner, nearly gets emotionally pulverized because Runo can't let go of her thirst for revenge. But deep down, she didn't want to defeat Dan. She wanted to prove something to herself. It's only when she realizes that true strength isn't about shouting louder, but about learning to listen, that Tigrera finally evolves into Blade Tigrera.
Blade Tigrera reporting for duty!
Slicing through pride like it's butter. Lars Lion in turn acknowledges the girl's growth. And for the first time, Runo lets go of a grudge that was never really hers to begin with. In the sinister dimension of perdition, the atmosphere itself seems to breathe tension. The landscape is suffocating, the air heavy with the weight of trials that have brought many to their knees. Now, it's Dan's turn to face this crucible. Apollinaire, the most legendary of the legendary Bakugan, makes an overwhelming entrance and declares Dan's opponent won't be just anyone. And that's when everything starts to unravel. A grotesque, wicked figure appears, a masked clown wielding a dragonoid identical to Drago, but the true horror begins when the mask falls away. Once, twice, 3, 4 times. Beneath it are the faces of Runo, Marucho, Julie, and Shun, now all turned against him. As Dan fights not to lose himself in this psychological nightmare, where every move becomes a moral dilemma, chaos erupts in the real world too. Alice suddenly faints in the middle of a conversation with Joe, who's instantly thrown into a brutal showdown with Masquerade, armed with nothing but courage, Wyvern, and the Infinity Core. Joe not only wins, but throws it in his enemy's face. Power can indeed serve a noble cause. Wyvern refuses to hand over the core and reveals Naga's grand plan to destroy Vestroya, and as a bonus, wipe out Earth as well, the kind of villain who doesn't know when to stop. Back in the dimension of perdition, Apollinaire delivers the cold, harsh truth. Drago will only reach his ultimate form if Dan defeats all his friends, not with heartfelt speeches or group hugs, but in battle, one by one, every blow, every strike, an emotional scar. And Dan understands, this will be the greatest fight of his life. Back in the real world, the brawlers emerge exhausted from the Doom dimension. It feels like the end of the road, but the legendary soldiers make one thing clear: that was just the warm-up. Dan, burdened by his unfinished mission, drops the bombshell no one wanted to hear. He has to fight his friends, all of them, because that's the only way Drago can evolve. The silence that follows says more than any scream ever could. Joe then recounts his battle against Masquerade. Now everyone knows, Wyvern has become Naga's most coveted prize. And Alice's absence? It's starting to feel less like coincidence, and more like a mystery waiting to be solved. As the brawlers return home, they try to hold on to fragments of a normal life, but on the other side of things, the game is still very much on. Dr. Michael drops a bomb. The dimensional transport system can work anywhere, even in the dreaded Doom dimension. In other words, if Naga wants to, he could pop up in your living room for a cup of coffee. Later, at a park, their reunion is a mix of tension and nostalgia. Wyvern is officially introduced. Jokes fly until the bomb drops again. Dan failed the test. The mission to face his friends starts now. Julie doesn't hesitate. If someone's taking the first hit, it's going to be her. The battle is fierce. Gorham storms in with earthquake-worthy brute strength. With the grand impact, he becomes a living wall. And Julie doesn't hold back on cheap tricks. She climbs onto Gorham, playing the helpless damsel to keep Dan from going all in. But sentimentalism has its limits, and Dan reaches his breaking point. With a merciless combo of D-strike attack and D-strike again, he turns the tide. Julie falls. On purpose, of course, putting on a dramatic show just to push Dan into fighting seriously. She gets up laughing. Mission accomplished. Her friend is ready. Now it's Marucho's turn, but the prodigy kid doesn't come alone. He brings Preyas and Angelo, turning the duel into a 2-on-1. The advantage? Strategy. Preyas shifts attributes as easily as changing outfits, and Angelo provides support with surgical precision. Drago holds his ground the best he can, and Dan proves he's learned more than just how to fight. He's learned how to think. At the perfect moment, he unleashes his full power with D-Strike Extreme. Victory, and the mutual respect between them remains unshaken. Shun, ever cold cold and calculating, postpones the final showdown to the next day. But the shadows don't wait. Alice is still missing, and in the Doom dimension, Masquerade faces off against the legendary soldiers. Yet something's off. A mysterious figure confronts him, someone who knows him far too well to be just another enemy. Meanwhile, Drago and Wyvern share a rare moment. They reveal their past. Both are attribute-less Bakugans, born between dimensions, different and rejected. One detail changes everything. Naga, Wyvern's brother, grew up filled with rage, and now he tries to seduce his sister with promises of ultimate power. Dan has won 2 battles, but the hardest one lies ahead. Shun awaits, and between the lines, the fate of 2 worlds hangs in the balance. And so, the storm was set. Dan, with 3 legendary soldiers already defeated, now faced one final challenge before reaching glory. Shun, the master of wind, ever calculating and cold, stood as the last wall between Drago and his long-awaited evolution. The battle begins as if choreographed by the gods of brawls. Drago and Skyrest spin through the skies like 2 comets on a collision course, trading blows so fierce that the very atmosphere seems to scream. But Shun doesn't just fight with power, he strikes where it hurts most, Dan's mind. He wields doubt like a weapon, and it hits deep, and it nearly works, almost, because Drago, even under pressure, finds that moment of divine clarity. He realizes that every step alongside Dan hasn't weakened him. Instead, it made him stronger. That's when everything changes. They sync up on an insane level, as if they had become one, and in a golden explosion of energy, Drago is reborn. Welcome, Ultimate Dragonoid.
The ultimate Dragonoid. It feels good.
But far away, a pair of eyes watches from the shadows. Masquerade, and he hasn't been idle either. His Bakugan, Hydronoid, now sports 3 heads and an even deeper thirst for destruction. The real threat was only beginning to rise. Somewhere far away, Alice opens her eyes, plagued by that nagging feeling of deja vu and amnesia. Runo arrives to rescue her, but the mystery only deepens. Meanwhile, the world is being turned upside down. Snow falls in Egypt. Northern lights dance over New York. Destroya is collapsing, and it's dragging Earth down with it. Amid the chaos, Masquerade challenges Joe, but it's Dan who steps up to answer the call, now supercharged with his ultimate Dragonoid. What follows is total destruction. Hydronoid emerges as a monstrous force, spewing chaos from its 3 jaws. Every blow feels like it could rip the planet in half, but right in the thick of battle, Dan realizes something crucial. It's not just about winning, it's about how you fight. That seemingly simple idea detonates in Masquerade's mind like an existential bomb. The guy who always saw battle as a numbers game suddenly finds himself lost in his own equation. Victory goes to Drago, but the moment that truly stuns everyone comes afterward. Masquerade removes the mask. And it's Alice. The kindest girl in the group was, unknowingly, the mastermind behind it all. The wolf wore the lamb's skin, and no one saw it coming. And then comes the ultimate bombshell. It was Alice's grandfather who dropped it. It all started with an explosion at the Silent Core, which contaminated the lab at the exact moment Alice was there. The result? Hal G became Naga's servant. And Alice? She created a second personality, Masquerade, a shadow acting without her knowledge. A puppet of chaos, wearing the face of the sweetest friend. Crushed by guilt, Alice decides to leave with her grandfather. She believes she doesn't deserve forgiveness. Not even her friend's pleas are enough to stop her. Meanwhile, somewhere in the Pacific, the sky tears open with a roar. It's time. The bridge between Vestroya and Earth is ready. Naga is about to cross over.
Can you hear me, my sister? Listen to me, Wyvern.
But the Brawlers won't just sit around waiting for the end of the world. Now that their families know everything, the decision is unanimous. It's time to take the fight straight to the enemy's backyard. Away from the spotlight and the roar of battle, Alice tries to reinvent herself among relatives who have no idea about the storm she carries inside. She's trying to forget the Bakugans, but the past has a way of reaching out with tentacles. Klaus appears out of nowhere, standing on a frozen lake, exuding the melancholy vibe of someone who's lost everything. He wants a rematch, but not with Alice, with Masquerade. He pushes for a battle, with Bakugans of his choosing, and Alice agrees. But the real fight isn't on the battlefield, it's inside her. The fear of losing control, of becoming Masquerade again, it paralyzes her, and hesitation comes at a price, defeat. But Klaus, unexpectedly, offers more than blows. He offers understanding. He tells her what no one ever has, that all attributes, from light to darkness, exist to maintain balance, and each one plays a role. Alice finally understands. plans. Running helps no one, and even with her soul still patched up with duct tape, she decides to return. In the surreal rift of Vestroia, where the impossible is just part of the scenery, the brawlers dive headfirst into a setting that looks like a psychedelic fever dream. Waterfalls hang in the air like liquid serpents, and whirlwinds twist through the clouds in an aerial dance between the realms of water and wind. Welcome to Aquaventus, where even gravity thinks twice before making a move. But beauty, as always, comes at a price. Taion and Herody, two elemental titans with egos the size of a black hole, rise from the void and lay down the law. Only the victors may pass. Dan gets the plan instantly. Divide, isolate, conquer. Marucho takes the mental kayak route, luring Tegan into the depths, while Shun drags Herody to dry land, where the wind becomes nothing but a gentle breeze. But surprise, the big guys swap elements like outfits on New Year's Eve. The strategy sinks, literally, until, in a perfectly timed, precision-synced ballet, the brawlers pinpoint the exact milliseconds when the monsters switch forms, and strike where it hurts. The portal opens, but relief doesn't follow. Vestroia's core is collapsing, and time is an enemy far worse than any elemental titan. Falling into a realm made of pulsating light and living stone might sound magical. Just wait until you meet the bizarre children who live there. Tricloid and Chen Li, trapped for millennia in the heart of a luminous labyrinth, have the kind of gaze that says they toy with minds just for fun. And their game? A race for freedom, or eternal captivity, surrounded by fossilized Bakugan remains displayed like macabre trophies on the walls. While Runo and Julie become pawns in a cruel game of crystal traps, Dan and Drago press on alone, navigating a path that quickly morphs into a war zone. Tricloid triggers earthquakes like she's tapping out a beat and unleashes blasts of light that leave retinas screaming in panic. But Dan is stubborn, and stubborn fools can move mountains. He scrapes through the labyrinth by a hair, prying more than a prize from Chen Li, a rare crystal, and unexpectedly, a sincere gesture. For the first time, someone here shows that even in a dimension gone mad, a trace of affection still remains. Still, they remain apart. What a poetic way to say, abandoned in hell. Dan and Drago land, or more accurately, crash, into a warped dimension of fire and shadow, the kind of place where logic takes early retirement. And of course, they barely catch their breath before the corrupted Garganoids emerge, a twisted mix of Lovecraftian nightmare and raw energy mutation. Salvation comes in the form of Noble Lion, an ancient Bakugan, noble as his name suggests, and with the air of someone who's seen far too much. He explains, Naga, driven by insatiable hunger, has torn holes in reality. The result? A collapsing universe, with attributes fusing together like a chaotic wedding cocktail. But the bad guys don't waste time. Centaurier and Druman show up, darker than overdue credit card debt, corrupted, insane, and wielding opposing powers that clash in violent equilibrium. What follows is pure poetic destruction, and the odds are nearly zero. With a final roar, Noble Lion chooses to sacrifice himself. He saves Dan and reveals the secret. Naga has no attribute, he is the void, the thing that remains when everything else is gone. With this mind-breaking truth pounding in their heads, Dan and Drago understand there's no turning back anymore. Amid the chaos, in the heart of desperation, the most controversial figure of the team is resurrected, Masquerade. But this time, the anti-hero isn't here to cause trouble. He's here to fight, side by side with Dan, and with Alpha Hydronoid in tow, things are about to get intense. The battlefield turns into a coliseum of mythic gladiators. Centaurier and Druman return, now wielding a new ability that reflects any attack back at its owner. Dan improvises. Masquerade goes all in, faking his own fall. Meanwhile, Dan orchestrates a symphony of chaos, the perfect distraction for the series' most insane strike. Alpha Hydronoid unleashes the Third Judgment. The explosion that follows could easily hang in a museum as an exhibit of contemporary destruction. And then, the emotional gut punch, Masquerade removes the mask.
I wish you good luck.
Masquerade, wait!
The line lands like an emotional bomb, and then she vanishes, only to return moments later, stronger than ever, alongside Alpha Hydronoid. Now the brawlers hold all 6 attributes. The team is whole. Marucho sums it up with the gravity of someone who knows what's coming. Now, we're ready to face Naga. But deep within Vestroia, Halgi laughs like someone who's been moving the pieces since the very first pawn on the board. It finally looked like peace was about to show its face. After sprinting across Vestroia like maniacs to collect all 6 attributes, the brawlers brawlers, fueled by that boundless energy only anime protagonists seem to possess, arrive at the destroyer's base, ready for an all-or-nothing showdown. But instead of explosions and a smug Naga flanked by an army, what they find is the most awkward silence since Julie tried cooking. Obviously, it was a trap. While the heroes fumbled around in a setting straight out of a prank reality show, Naga put his evil genius plan into motion, turn the brawlers into walking distractions and leave Earth defenseless. And as if that weren't enough, he starts ripping open dimensional rifts all over the place. Corrupted Bakugans begin plummeting from the sky, hell-bent on destruction. Meanwhile, Joe, not a battle brawler, but the undisputed general of group chats, flips into full-on war commander mode, rallying the troops through emergency broadcasts. Brawlers from all over the world begin to organize, while poor Wyvern strains to keep up a barrier of energy powered solely by sheer will. Things go completely off the rails when Cycloid and his psycho crew launch attacks on every front. Julie, Marucho, and the rest are left scrambling. Then finally, as always fashionably late, Dan manages to get through to the others. Together with Drago and Wyvern, he tears open a portal through the darkness. The brawlers return to Earth, and the game changes. It looks like Worthington has turned into a literal war zone. The brawlers land in the city only to find what's left of a civilization desperately holding on. Wyvern, sacrificing herself, keeps a force field around the city, but her energy's running lower than Alice's patience reserves. While Rebeater breaks through the barrier and starts causing havoc, Alice decides to face the challenge alone. Marucho runs through the outskirts of the city trying to contain the attack, when suddenly the JJ dolls appear. Yes, the JJ dolls, the pop stars. And honestly, they fight better than a lot of seasoned warriors out there. Together with Marucho, they turn the streets into a spectacular show of lights, sound, and choreographed destruction. But it's not all pyrotechnics and applause. Their attempted quadruple chain attack flops hard, souring the mood, until the roar of the crowd brings back that stage spirit. Fueled by the roar of the crowd, the JJ dolls bounce back in style and defeat Tegan in a match that's more than just a sigh of relief. It's a powerful act of resistance. In the midst of all the chaos, Billy reappears, and with him, Cycloid, now free from Naga's manipulative grip. Julie, who can barely decide what she wants for breakfast, finds herself torn between the battlefield and the emotional whirlwind of running into her old crush. Enter Tricloid, arriving with that classic villain who thinks she's justified energy. Her mission? To reunite with her sister Rebeater, a promise made by Naga, the same guy who collects lies like trophies. With her solid balloon ability, Tricloid becomes a walking wall, reflecting attacks like someone firing off a passive-aggressive email reply. Then suddenly, Nene shows up. Just like that, she claims to be the greatest brawler of all time. Spoiler alert, she's not. But with her Darkest Warius, she throws the duel off balance, giving Billy the opening he needs. He targets Tricloid's emotional vulnerability, leading her to finally realize she was just another pawn in Naga's game. The result? Tricloid backs out of the fight, decides to search for her sister on her own, and walks away. Julie and Billy finally break their emotional stalemate. In the dead of night, Rebeater breaks into a residential area like someone picking up a package from the post office, but Alice has made up her mind. She's done being masquerade. It's time to be herself. Who shows up? Christopher, with Juggernaut up his sleeve and ready to battle. Alongside Hydronoid, they take on Rebeater. Just when all seems lost, Klaus von Herzen makes a grand entrance, flawless. As if strutting down an Aquas runway, Alice falters. The shadow of masquerade nearly pulls her back, but Christopher delivers that classic pep talk that always works. Strength comes from self-belief, and that's when Alice switches tactics. Instead of responding with violence, she leads with empathy, and it breaks Rebeater from the inside out. For the first time, the warrior hesitates. She decides to leave Naga behind and go after Tricloid, alone and free. The brawlers breathe a sigh of relief, but they know the real storm is still coming, because Harity is on the way, and with him, a power that could rewrite the rules of the game. The city of Worthington is in full-blown panic. Sirens blare, evacuation is underway, and amidst the urban chaos, the brawlers gear up for the most dangerous battle of their lives. Naga is coming, and he's not here for a chat. But before the grand finale kicks off, an icy surprise streaks across the sky. Harity crashes the scene like an unwanted wedding crasher, turning the heavens into a sinister block of ice. Skyress and Harpus, frozen solid in crystal, like B-movie extras who never stood a chance. Shun doesn't wait, no Bakugan, no elaborate strategies, just raw courage and a dash of madness. He charges ahead alone to rescue his imprisoned partners. Meanwhile, Alice is dealing with a bigger crisis than her own existential dread. Her grandfather, once again possessed by Hal G, is teetering between classic villain and deranged grandpa.
No! You leave me alone!
Desperate to save her family's soul, she brings him to Wyvern. Bad move. It's a trap, and she walks right into it. Back on the front lines, Shun returns with serious backup. Julio, wielding his gamma ray that shatters darkness like a house of cards. Skyrus breaks free, wakes up with fire in her eyes, and he unleashes pure devastation. Just one destruction meteor strike, and Parody was history. The fall of Parody was just the warm-up. Now it's Centaurier and Truman's turn to make their entrance. Like any good late-showing villains announcing, "We've arrived." Dan and Runo are thrown into an urban war zone, surrounded by crumbling buildings and heavy tension. Drago and Tagara hold their ground, but Dan has a bolder plan. Take the fight back to the park where it all began. Because of course, nostalgia is a powerful weapon, and possibly the only battlefield where they still hold an edge. Meanwhile, behind the scenes of the tragedy, Alice unknowingly plays the role of the perfect bait. Naga reveals himself in the Tower of Wardington, where Wyvern and the Infinity Core wait as the prize in a cosmic bingo game. Hal G, now stripped of all dignity, is reduced to nothing more than the boss's errand boy. Shun and Skyrus arrive in a rush, but they're too late. Naga is just inches away from getting exactly what he wants. And so, remember Centaurier and Truman wiped off the map, but what really matters is what the Brawlers find when they reach the tower, an emotional wasteland. Naga has taken over everything. Hal G is more unbearable than ever, and Alice is being held hostage. Fortress tries to put an end to it, but it's like playing dominoes against a tsunami. Wyvern is fading, literally. Her time is running out, and Naga knows it. Then, she does the unthinkable. She begs Drago to destroy her, and Drago, in tears, obeys. He unleashes the ultimate dragon Exceed in a desperate act of heroism. But she leaves behind a gift. The Infinity Core now pulses within Drago, and thus, Infinity Drago is born. The final hope for everything that still breathes. With cosmic power surging through his veins, Infinity Drago faces off against Naga in a battle so massive, the city of Wardington begins to float. Each with 1,000 G-powers, it's like God hit the apocalypse mode switch. Naga snaps. He summons his dark paladins, breaking rules, contracts, and maybe even physics. The Brawlers, loyal to the end, go all in. Every remaining Bakugan attacks, because losing isn't an option. Drago channels all 6 elemental abilities into a single strike, a blow that rewrites the laws of the universe. Naga is obliterated. The nightmare is over. But not all victories are sweet. Dr. Michael announces that the Bakugan must return to Vestroia to restore balance. Drago has become the core of that world, and that means leaving Dan behind. One by one, partners say their goodbyes, and Dan returns to his routine. But he carries the memory of a universe where he was more than just a teenager. He was a hero. Vestroia is safe, but the cost was high. The permanent separation of 2 worlds that, for a moment, had become one. In the throbbing heart of New Vestroia, where the perfect core glows like a mystical pulse, Drago feels only the crushing weight of helplessness. The 6 legendary soldiers fall one by one under the brutal onslaught of the Vestals, toppling like dominoes of power. Unable to resist the collapse, Tigrera is the last to fall, trying to be a wall when only sand remains. Drago's cry of anguish shatters the core's silence like a thunderclap. He calls upon the ancients, and against all reason they answer, an offer impossible to ignore. Drago can be freed, restored, but at a terrible cost, surrendering part of his strength. He accepts, because the freedom to fight is worth more than the power to rule. And so, weakened but free, he tears through the skies toward Earth. He needs Dan, and Dan must know, the Bakugan are no longer warriors. They've become circus acts, playthings in a brutal blood sport across Vestal's arenas. Worse still, Dan's friends are the star attractions. New Vestroia is no longer home. It's a prison. The Vestal cities impose their arrogant architecture, and an energy field reduces any Bakugan to a powerless sphere. Dan and Drago barely set foot before being greeted with scorn by Link and Volt. Without a gauntlet, Dan gets beat up worse than a gym punching bag. Luck changes names. Mira, daughter of the scientist who enslaves Bakugan, but a defector. She leads the resistance. In Dan, she sees more than just a stubborn kid. She sees the legendary warrior. And Dan delivers. He masters the gauntlet with ridiculous precision, as if it were wired into his bloodstream. But Ace, the Resistance's honorary rebel, isn't buying it. He throws down a challenge that stretches over 3 hours. An epic clash of power and instinct, ending with both warriors collapsing at the same time. Only then does Mira lay it out. 3-dimension controllers keep the Bakugan captive, one in each Vestal city. A suicide mission? No doubt, but the alternative is worse. Baron trains like the world depends on it, because it does. But the kid is shattered. He lost Tigrera to Spectra, and now fear has become an addiction. He'd rather surrender Namus than watch another fall. The test comes with a bang. Shadowprove and Mylene storm in. Shadow picks Baron as his target, mocking his weakness. Baron trembles, but Namus believes in him, and that changes everything. At first, it's a massacre. Shadow activates the drag zone and unleashes the darkest hammer sword. Baron only defends, as if apologizing for even existing, but at the breaking point, he triggers Shade Cocoon, and when the power gap hits 750 points, he releases Flow Skylight, a fusion ability as rare as decent Wi-Fi in an elevator. He wins. He frees 3 Bakugan, and more importantly, he finds his courage again. Marucho feels like a ghost, without prayas, without purpose. He vanishes into the forest, determined to find a new partner or get lost trying. There, he encounters Elfin, a guardian of the local wildlife. That's when Mylene appears, unleashing Tripod Theta, a trap Bakugan that turns the defeated into zombies. Elfin is possessed. Marucho throws himself between her and destruction, activating Delta Marone Snow, a move that only works between true partners. That's when Elfin changes. She chooses to fight for him. The battle seems doomed, until a mysterious figure in the shadows destroys the trap Bakugan. Marucho returns with Elfin at his side, and a new mystery. Who was their unseen savior? The Vexos base reeks of failure. Gus proposes a crisis meeting. Spectra gives him a mission, prove your worth. Meanwhile, Dan receives Scorpion, a resurrected trap Bakugan, powerful, silent, and mysterious. During training, a stranger appears, and his words cut deeper than any attack. Battling without purpose is meaningless. He vanishes, but the doubt remains. Spectra is unimpressed by his opinion. He sees Dan as a rival on the rise, perhaps an ally, perhaps a threat. Gus proves his value by winning with fusion techniques so devastating that the loser joins the Vexos. Spectra doesn't convert through force. He converts through persuasion. Gus challenges Dan on an open broadcast. A trap, obviously, but Dan doesn't back down. Vulcan, Gus's Bakugan, dominates. Drago holds on. Scorpion joins the fight, but it's not enough. Dan is on the brink of defeat. Then, a familiar shadow cuts across the battlefield. Shun. Long missing, he returns.
Yes! It's Shun!
Ingram in hand, storm in his eyes. But the true storm bears another name, Spectra. He arrives with Helios, a monstrous force that crushes Drago with disdain. He reveals he has already defeated Tigrera. Dan loses control. Drago responds with Strike Dragon, a soul-fueled blow. Still, not enough. Only with Shun and Ingram stepping in is defeat narrowly avoided. Spectra smiles. Drago is evolving, and the project to create the perfect Dragonoid has just begun. Alpha City, capital of New Vestroia, and a bad joke. Instead of villains, it's a city where Vestals live like ordinary citizens, and the Vexos, they're celebrities. Mira follows the trail of her brother, Keith. In their home, frozen in time, everything reeks of memories. Everything but their father, who treats Keith like a mistake better left forgotten. Suspicious, Mira tails him. She discovers Altair, a cybernetic Bakugan, born from sheer obsession, a technological abomination, powered by unrestrained ambition. Link tries to cover up the scandal and forces a battle. Altair is a walking tank of destruction, but each double attack drains its energy. Mira spots the flaw. Altair collapses, but there's no glory, only the bitter taste of knowing her father traded family for control. With Alpha City under their control, the team hatches a suicide mission. Destroy the dimensional controller. The tower is linked to the arena. It siphons energy from the battles to keep the Bakugan under control. They split up. Shun and Ace enter the tournament while the others infiltrate the facility. Ironic twist of fate? Maybe. But the explosive synergy between the two is pure tactical brilliance. Marucho, going full theater mode, disguises himself as the masked brawler and delivers such a dramatically crushing defeat that the crowd forgets to breathe. Meanwhile, the infiltration progresses. In the semifinals, Shun and Ace face the Dark Angels and underestimate them. Big mistake, by the way. With Shadow Echo and Power Eraser, the rookies tear the charade apart. The final match is against Link and Volt. The heart of the operation is now exposed, and the arena is no longer a show, it's war. The crowd roars. Adrenaline floods the arena stands. seconds. On stage, the mysterious newcomers face off against the Vexos like it's just another tournament. But this is war, and there's no such thing as a draw. Under the spotlight, Shun, Ace, Link, and Volt clash with fierce intensity. Meanwhile, deep beneath the arena, Dan and Marucho make their way through a labyrinth of high-tech traps, the kind of setup that looks like it was designed by someone with a vendetta against user-friendly architecture. Their destination, the Dimensional Controller, a towering monolith of pure architectural arrogance, guarded by a laser grid that would put the Pentagon to shame. Drago takes the lead. In a precision-perfect flight, he strikes the structure's weak point, triggering a surge of energy that makes an EDM festival look like a school picnic. Above, the Bakugan awaken, and they speak. Yes, they talk. And with a single statement, they shatter the Vexos narrative. Alpha City shakes. The Bakugan revolt. The Vexos reign begins to crumble, and from the rubble of the old order, something new begins to rise. While New Vestroia is heating up, Earth is cooling down in worry. Dan and Marucho have vanished, and of course, Runo and Julie stumble upon a suspiciously shady dimensional card. Naturally, they decide to investigate because no one ever learns from the phrase, "Don't mess with that." With the help of the ever-reckless Dr. Michael, the transporter is reactivated. Runo goes in alone. Brilliant. Stuck between dimensions, she becomes a target for Shadow Proof, who, unsurprisingly, falls for a classic trap. Spectra, ever the opportunist, plots to use Runo as a pawn. Chaos erupts. Dan and Marucho race to save her, while Shadow throws the rulebook out the window and goes straight for the humans. Totally off script. The battle unfolds like the writers overdosed on caffeine and rage. Marucho clings to the fight tooth and nail, while Dan pulls Runo out of the mess. But the portal collapses, swallowing half the cast, and returning not only allies to Earth, but also Spectra and Gus. The lines between worlds have just been erased. Back on Earth, the team barely has time to catch their breath before Link shows up, and not with flowers. He brings a souped-up mechanical Bakugan powered by pure resentment. The order is simple. Punch first, never ask questions. Baron faces the Fury. Amid explosions and collisions, the soul of the battle reveals itself. Heart always beats cold steel. Piercing and Namus prove that emotional connection is weapon, shield, and ammo. Meanwhile, Alice appears with a trump card inherited from Masquerade. A dimensional card. Just one, but enough to send Spectra and Gus back home. The price? Dr. Michael's system fries like a modem in a thunderstorm. Victory tastes bittersweet. They're stuck on Earth, and now the enemy knows where they live, what they eat, and probably even the dog's name. The war just lost its manners. Now it's personal. The fragile truce is barely holding together. Dan tries to relax at an amusement park with Mira and Baron, but peace in their world is always short-lived, about as long as a flash sale. Spectra and Gus appear, but not to battle. They want to talk. Yes, talk. Spectra claims their true enemy is Prince Hydron. He confesses he's been infiltrating the Vexos from the inside, aiming to dismantle the system. Mira's not buying it, so Spectra makes her a shady offer. If she wins a battle, he'll remove his mask. If she loses, she joins them. Mira squares off against Gus. Earth versus technology. Wilda channels the raw might of nature, and in a powerful symbolic moment, overcomes both Vulcan and Hexados. True to his word, Spectra unmasks, and what's revealed hits harder than any battle.
It is you. Keith.
Mira's long-lost brother, a hero turned villain, and now the story takes a dramatic turn into family, loyalty, and betrayal. At Runo's parents' cafe, a lingering glance is exchanged. Mira recalls Keith's promise. No one knows what he's planning, maybe not even him. Far from there, New Vestroia is falling apart. Without Drago, the perfect core teeters on the brink of collapse. Dimensional controllers Beta and Delta go into high alert, and Alpha, it's on the verge of revival, bringing the Vexos back with it. Marucho, Ace, and Shun stand as the final barrier. 3 against an empire. Their mission, destroy the Beta controller. Malene, leading the Vexos, plays chess with lives. She divides the heroes. The first piece to fall, Marucho. He hears the voices of Dan and Mira calling out to him and walks straight into the trap. Malene takes the first round. Marucho crosses the desert like he's walking through a blazing furnace. No water, no direction, but Elfin is by his side. Then Volt appears. The duel is brutal. Brontes switches attributes with lethal precision, crushing Elfin's defenses. But Marucho spots an opening. He forces Brontes to shift into Subterra, stripping him of his edge. It looks like the tide is turning, but Volt unveils his final card, a never-before-seen fusion that pushes Brontes' power to outrageous levels. Marucho holds on, but he falls. One by one, the brawlers are defeated. Only one remains. Shun walks through the rubble, the city in absolute silence. Only he and Ingram remain, until Shadow Proof appears, bringing with him a nightmare, dark as Hades, a grotesque fusion of Hydronoid and twisted technology. The battle is more than just physical. Shun faces memories, ghosts, and guilt. Hades strikes with a fury only engineered monsters can wield. From a distance, Professor Clay watches, satisfied like a villain relishing the climax of his own evil film. Ingram hesitates. Shun hesitates. But in the end, they stand together. But it's no use. The technological giant wins. Shun is defeated. There's no need for the Vexos to invade anymore. All they have to do is open the door. Dan feels the impact. Nightmares haunt him. The fall of his friends weighs heavier than gravity. Spectra issues the ultimate challenge, a final duel. One-on-one. Drago stands with Dan, as always. The battle is worthy of a season finale. Helios and Drago clash with titanic blows. Spectra breaks the limit. He unleashes the forbidden technique, Nova Blazer X. Helios mutates into an unstable monster, a runaway engine of raw power. Drago falls, and with him, hope. Spectra wins and takes Drago. Dan wakes up, completely apathetic. Drago's absence feels like a hole in his soul. He trains until he collapses. Spectra, on the other hand, senses something is wrong. Power isn't enough. Hydron begins closing the portals. The end is near. On the brink of despair, Apollinaire answers the call. An ancient warrior, one of the legendary ones. He reveals, Drago is being corrupted by the forbidden cards. The end is close. Apollinaire brings Dan to Spectra. Gus tries to stop them, but fails. Drago appears. But what emerges isn't the companion they once knew. It's something darker, a shadow of power. And the next battle isn't for glory, it's for redemption. Destruction doesn't knock, it breaks down the door. Drago, corrupted to his very core, forces his body to channel all 6 attributes at once. The dragon is pushed to the brink, and the forbidden cards are eager to drag him even deeper into the abyss. Spectra watches, almost blasé, like someone betting on a lame horse just to see the world burn. That's when Apollinaire, with the eyes of someone who's seen a few extra millennia, makes the final call. He's going to sacrifice himself. Literally, he turns into pure energy and launches himself straight into Drago's chest. Dan holds back the emotion, takes a deep breath, and throws, and hits. The strike shatters the curse. Spectra vanishes from the scene with priceless data in hand, and Drago returns to classic hero mode. Burn the script. The resistance has been reborn. Time to say goodbye, or at least it was supposed to be. Dan and the crew are all about hugs and heartfelt promises, but the script cranks up the drama like a soap opera finale. Spectra, that chaos-driven CEO, strikes a shady deal with Link. In this world, loyalty is just another bargaining chip. Of course, Alice tries to stop it, but ends up walking straight into a trap like a clueless fool. And then comes the gut punch. Mira switches sides. No subtlety, no tears. She chooses Spectra. She chooses Keith. The door shuts, literally. Apollinaire, drained, can't hold the portal open any longer. All that's left is Dan and Baron, setting off on a solo journey. The road back to New Vestroia won't be kind. New Vestroia greets them with tense silence and the stench of betrayal in the air. Drago can feel it already. The core is vibrating like it's on the verge of exploding. The Vexos are everywhere, more in control than a dad with a banking app on his phone. In Beta City's prison, former allies wait Shun, Marucho, Ace, and of course Mira, now wearing a Vexos badge. The brawl breaks out with Shadowproof and Mylene. Strategy? None. Just fists flying and frustration building, until Spectra shows up, frees everyone, and vanishes. Yep, still the king of dramatic exits. Drago links with the perfect core and shatters the chains. Cold War? That's old news. Now it's blood in the eyes, and on the battlefield. Now Keith is a deranged scientist, obsessed with building the ultimate Helios. A cyborg so terrifying it would make Deathstroke look like a toy. The mask comes off, literally. Mira faces the truth and the inevitable showdown. She goes all in. If she wins, she gets her brother back. If she loses, well, she knows the rules. Helios isn't just a war machine with a god complex. He's an adaptive monster. Mira surrenders. Officially part of the Vexos now, but her eyes still burn with gunpowder. One last bullet left. Mira, now an unwilling spy, is introduced to Prince Hydron, a collector of ancient Bakugan with questionable taste and emotional instability. The dimensional controller of Gamma City becomes the new target. The problem, the city is an underground bunker where every step feels like a trap. Volt uses illusions against Baron, while Shadow and Mylene become relentless hunters. Dan and Ace try to reach the core, but as always, Mira appears with Gus, The duel turns personal, brutal. Mira strikes hard, but something in her attacks whispers, this is all an act, and the doubt begins to eat away at everything. Hydron finally realizes he was deceived. Spectra has stolen his mechanical Bakugan, but with the charm of a politician during election season, Spectra manages to spin it as part of a test. Amid the heat of battle, Mira drops the act. She was never one of the Vexos. She was a mole all along. But now the ruse is over. She turns on Gus, destroys the control device, and seals the fall of Gamma City. Alpha and Beta already gone. The Bakugan are free, but Spectra still has one final card to play, and it reeks of apocalypse. The Resistance barely has time to celebrate. Hydron unveils a backup controller, perched at the top of the palace, a place only birds can reach. With no flight, the Bakugan are just useless balls. Spectra shows up. Dan knows. It's now or never. Helios is back, more powerful than ever. And the Barbas system? Simple. The more it gets hit, the stronger it becomes. Like that toxic relative at Sunday lunch. Spectra plays his final card, Maxis Helios, a monster stacked with every attribute.
Maxis Helios!
Dan counters by fusing his own Bakugan into Maxis Dragonoid.
How's it feel, man?
Not bad.
Meanwhile, Mylene, ever the opportunist, readies her next move, because in the middle of the crossfire, there's always someone pulling strings from the shadows. New Vestroia crumbles. High above, Drago and Helios clash in a sky-shattering battle, one that would leave even Zeus speechless. Meanwhile, Marucho reverses the petrification, bringing the stone statues back to life. Skyres, Preyas, Tigrera, and Gorum are back in the game, but the palace begins to collapse. Self-destruct sequence initiated. The Vexos flee, abandoning Spectra to die. Gus is loyal. He saves his leader at the last second. Spectra survives, but makes one thing clear. Next time, only one of them walks away. The Vexos are no more. A brief moment of relief. Mira, Baron, and Ace return to Vestal on a political mission. Overthrow the monarchy and put an end to Hydron once and for all. Skyres decides to stay behind, trusting Ingram to watch over Shun. The catch? Drago can't come back. The Perfect Core still needs him. But then, Apollinaire appears with a solution. Drago can now open portals on his own. Back on Earth, Alice and Hydronoid welcome the team. Julie reunites with Gorum. The gang's back together, but don't get too excited. Behind the scenes, King Zenoheld is preparing the real final boss. Zenoheld has finally pulled the trigger on his craziest plan yet. A death ray with a 6,000-kilometer range and an ego that's gone full over 9,000. The name of this delightful little doomsday device, the Bakugan termination system. And for it to work, it needs to suck the energy from all 6 ancient attributes. Basically, an all-you-can-eat buffet of mystical power served straight into the villain's mouth. Meanwhile, back on Vestal, the Resistance is reaping what it sowed. Fueled by outrage and a conveniently live broadcast, the people are rising up with torches in hand. The result? Zenoheld and Hydron scurry off like two cockroaches caught under the kitchen light. And because disaster loves company, the Earth Bakugan get dragged into a spiritual side quest. There, they encounter the 6 ancient warriors, in a state of already lost. Turns out, they were taken down by Farbros, Zenoheld's stainless steel Bakugan. With their last ounce of dignity, the old-timers pass on their powers. Drago, Preyas, Tigrera, Gorum, Skyres, and Hydronoid return, fully upgraded, like Power Rangers fresh out of a cosmic CrossFit session. Now, it all comes down to this. The fate of the Bakugan rests in the hands of whoever still has a token left to play in this intergalactic arcade. Baron is enjoying a peaceful afternoon at the park with his family, and a generous serving of pudding when reality slaps him across the face. Hydron is back, and forget the prince title. He's now an exiled maniac hell-bent on revenge. Their reunion, about as graceful as a hooligan brawl. Hydron's Bakugan, Trioid, radiates an energy that feels like it crawled out of the villain's emotional black hole. Even with its darkest turbo form, Nemesis can barely catch its breath. The battlefield turns into a tactical nightmare. Hydron shuts down abilities, drains energy, and basically becomes the VAR of disaster. In the climax, he activates a trap that paralyzes Nemesis like it just connected to the death Wi-Fi. Baron loses, but he doesn't break. He gets back up, dusts himself off, and swears to warn Dan. Now it's personal, and personal wars. They're the ones that bleed the most. The illusion of peace on Vestal crumbles when the Aqua states, that bogus front pretending everything's fine, are breached. The Vexos are back, and more organized than a homeowners association meeting. Ace reunites with Klaus, now fighting on their side. Meanwhile, Dan is finally home and just wants to eat his pudding. But the calm doesn't last long. Mylene enters the fray hungry for power. power, hell-bent on squeezing every last pixel out of Percival. But Klaus, alongside Cyranoid and proudly wielding his title of Aquos Prince, flips the script, even with Mylene's Abside tech, which looks like it came straight out of a low-budget Black Mirror episode. Now she's defeated. One thing's clear, the Vexos aren't just back, they're in boss mode. The gang connects with Dan and learns the worst. The BT system, already powered with half of the ancient energy, is being activated. Time to go full blast. Tactically, of course. Shun decides to investigate a dimensional distortion in New Vestroia. There, he finds the planet turned into a museum of petrified Bakugan. Skyres reveals the cause. A metallic sphere buried underground is blocking everything. The beta version of the BT system is already online. Link shows up with all the charisma of a brick and brings along a mechanical Elico. The fight is rough. Ingram is insecure, tripping over his own fears, but Skyres gives him a sharp wake-up call, and Ingram finally unleashes the Shadow Wing, a hard-fought win, but a win nonetheless. The BT system remains active, but for now, no one's been wiped from the server. Out of nowhere, Spectra goes live, not to pitch an online course, but to expose Xenoheld's empire, and proudly proclaim himself a traitor. That move cuts off the Vexos' reinforcements, and the tension escalates faster than a Twitter feud. At Klaus's castle, Volt arrives, right before Spectra makes a dramatic entrance. The ex-Vexos beef turns into a full-blown UFC showdown. Spectra introduces Helios MK2, his lab-grown Bakugan, forged through shock and suffering. While Drago represents organic evolution, Helios is pure luxury Frankenstein. No punches are pulled. Drago and Helios clash like the fate of the world depends on it, and it does. Spectra withdraws at the peak of the fight, like a true villain who knows there are still episodes to fill. Volt, loyal to his code, pulls back too, but the message was loud and clear. This is war, and it's between titans. With the Vexos transports destroyed, Xenoheld changes course. He sends Mylene through Earth via a shadowy shortcut. Poor Alice just wanted some peace. But who shows up? Shadow Probe, a nightmarish clown creepy enough to give the Joker nightmares. Still haunted by the trauma of having once been Masquerade, Alice freezes. Mira hands her the gauntlet. Hydronoid tries to motivate her, but she's in full existential meltdown. Despite her hesitation, she faces off against Shadow Probe, who summons Hades and Oberus in a combo straight out of a nightmare. Alice fights back, but she's out of practice and drowning in guilt. Dr. Michael's lab explodes. Earth is cut off, and Alice is shattered. Meanwhile, Volt watches from a distance, and something inside him begins to crack. Volt uncovers the lowest blow yet. Brontes was reprogrammed by Gus, turned into an automaton. His partner's soul is gone, and this isn't just betrayal, it's desecration. With Earth under siege, Dan suspects a trap, but a mission's a mission. Ace and Mira set off with Klaus. Baron, in a dramatic farewell, stays behind with his family. Spectra appears at the castle, demanding Drago. Klaus isn't buying it and drives him off. Meanwhile, Volt faces Gus in a soul-crushing duel. Brontes, now just a shadow of himself, fights on autopilot, but in a flash, he hesitates. A flicker of who he used to be. Gus escapes. Brontes remains, but maybe it's already too late. Alice is wounded, the lab lies in ruins, and Brontes is shattered. The Vexos are claiming Earth like it's some abandoned lot. Marucho activates the dimensional shield, cloaking his mansion, now the new resistance bunker. But Dan is already fed up with the wait-and-see plan. Patience has never been the strong suit of someone who solves problems with his fists. Runo, tired of inaction, charges ahead. Mira tries to stop her, but gets dragged into the fray. What follows isn't just a defeat, it's a complete humiliation. Tigrera and Wilda are taken apart like toys in the Vexos' hands. In the end, Mylene and Link walk away with Subterra and Aquos in their possession. Runo and Mira return devastated, not physically, emotionally. The Vexos aren't just winning, they're rewriting the rules of the game. Tension runs high in Marucho's hideout. The bitter defeat of Runo and Mira not only crushes the team's morale, but also ignites a venomous spark between Preyas and Elfin. The friction that's been bubbling under the surface finally erupts. On one side, Preyas, lashing out with biting sarcasm. On the other, Elfin, masking her insecurity with a poorly veiled arrogance. The outcome? She leaves the group, alone, exposed. It doesn't take long for Shadowproof and Hydron to appear, circling like vultures over a battlefield, scenting opportunity. But the hunt flips into a trap when Marucho and Preyas crash in like twin hurricanes, determined to make things right. What follows is a ruthless battle. Shadow vanishes and strikes with ghost-like precision. Hydron, cold as steel, commands the flow with unsettling calm. But it's Elfin, yes, Elfin, who changes everything when she throws herself in front of a lethal attack to save Preyas. The gesture burns away both their prides like acid. For the first time, they fight like a real team. But redemption doesn't shield against tragedy. The Aquos energy is taken, Elfin falls, and though the team stands united once more, they are left shattered. Baron tries to escape the chaos with an unlikely breather, taking his sister Marin on a quick trip to Earth. An innocent little outing, if only the Vexos weren't hot on their trail. At the park, his reunion with Shun feels almost meditative, almost, because Volt crashes the piece with a thirst for revenge. The battle literally freezes time. Visitors trapped inside a temporal bubble, Baron shielding Marin, and Shun moving with his trademark silent precision. Volt, brute as ever, is caught off guard by the duo's synchronized dance, and when things get critical, it's Shun who pulls off a save worthy of a seasoned ninja. The enemy falls, the Ventus energy is safe, and Marin? She returns to Vestal with a new perspective on her brother and his allies. A spark lit that's bound to ignite something greater. With the world on the brink of collapse, Marucho pulls out his ace, the Bakugan Interspace, a virtual battleground where brawlers can train, fight, and survive without risking real lives. But the calm lasts about as long as Dan's internet connection. Billy, an old friend of Julie's, shows up, and he's wearing a Vexos gauntlet. What was supposed to be a training simulation turns into a massacre. Julie and Billy go down. There's no time to breathe. Shun, the team's ever-paranoid watchdog, digs into the system. The truth hits like a gut punch. Billy was followed. The hideout is no longer safe. That's when Dan proposes the unthinkable. Strike the Mother Palace. All that's left is convincing Spectra. And that, of course, will take more than just words. Spectra refuses to talk. He drags Dan aboard his ship and proposes a high-stakes duel. The location of the Mother Palace in exchange for the perfect core energy. Helios, more monstrous than ever, clashes with Drago in a titanic battle, but Drago isn't fighting for himself alone. He bears the hopes of all the Bakugan from New Vestroia. That's the edge that turns the tide in his favor. True to his word, Spectra leads the brawlers to the enemy fortress, but before leaving, he snatches a suspicious file, something about a new form of Bakugan evolution. After all, who can resist an upgrade? Not even a masked villain. The mission is clear: infiltrate the Mother Palace and locate the BT system. But Spectra has other plans. His path leads him straight to Xenoheld, and their reunion erupts in accusations, hatred, and, inevitably, violence. Gus, loyal to his final breath, stands against the Vexos king, and he pays the price. Vulcan and Ellico are destroyed. Gus falls, not in weakness, but in honor. Spectra watches his comrades fall, powerless to intervene, and in that moment, something shifts. This is no longer strategy, this is vengeance. They arrive at the BT system, but what seemed like the end of the journey was only the beginning of the trap. Shadowprove and Link grin, as if they already know the final score. The arena is corrupted. Living Bakugan have their energy drained, while mechanized ones regenerate in an endless loop. Shun and Baron fall, then Mira and Dan follow. Marucho holds on, but statistics don't lie. The field is rigged. Drago is the last one standing. He faces Hydron with everything he's got, but just before the final blow, Spectra appears, not to save Dan, but to avenge Gus, and maybe, just maybe, stop the end of everything. Spectra and Helios play their ultimate move, the Twin Destructor Battle Gear, a groundbreaking technology that bypasses the energy drain system and turns the tide of the battle. Xenoheld and Clay can only watch helplessly as the battlefield collapses. The Vexos are forced to retreat, but the victory feels hollow. The energies have been gathered, the BT system is now complete, and the living Bakugan are doomed. Dan's plan is simple in theory, but suicidal in practice. Evacuate all Bakugan to Earth using Spectra's ship. It's chaos, screams, portals, explosions. Drago refuses to leave anyone behind. He and Helios team up for one final assault to push the BT system out of the atmosphere. Drago absorbs the energy and survives, reborn as Helix Dragonoid, but Spectra vanishes, just like any true anti-hero would. Back on Earth, something is wrong with Bakugan Interspace. Data appears out of nowhere, digital echoes from the final mission. Baron is the first to confront this new threat, a digital avatar of himself, a ghostly Bakugan, equipped with an unknown battle gear that mercilessly crushes him. The past of the Vexos still lingers, and now it haunts even the ones and zeros, because apparently not even ghosts can rest in peace in this universe. Dan's mind doesn't get a moment's rest, and this time it's Spectra's voice echoing, proposing one final duel. No tricks, no illusions, just them. Drago versus Helios, like gods at war. The battlefield turns into a personal apocalypse. In a move that borders on madness or bravery, Spectra disables all safety protocols. If he dies, and the Bakugans exchange blows so intense it feels like the universe might collapse just from watching. At the climax, Helios acknowledges Drago's power, and then the mask falls. Literally. Keith is back, unmasked, After the storm, there's even a reconciliation with Mira, but before he can make peace with the past, he wants to help shape the future, build a battle gear for Drago, but to do that, he still has to fight as Spectra. Keith is now officially one of the brawlers. Ace is not taking it well, and not just because Mira's giving her brother way too much attention. As usual, Marucho drops the bomb. The phantom data that's been popping up everywhere, it's identical to the kind Spectra used. Naturally, the phantom Bakugan are directly tied to what was stolen in space. Given the circumstances, the most logical decision is to develop a unique battle gear just for Drago. The base of the project? Pure dragon DNA. Drago, of course, hesitates, but in the end, he gives in. Keith swears he's not turning him into a war machine, just a friendly little upgrade. Meanwhile, Clay, the ray of sunshine that he is, creates a weapon based on the phantom data. Nothing too crazy, just something with the power to wipe out planets. Drago, now the test subject, faces off against Keith. The process is torture, literally, but the dragon pulls through. He survives. And ultimately, he masters the new power. Thus, Jet Core is born. Xenoheld decides he's had enough of diplomacy and orders the activation of the alternative weapon. But not everyone's eager to play genocide. Volt rebels and pays a heavy price. Mira, ever the dutiful daughter, tries to bring her father back to sanity. Volt, on the other hand, returns to his hometown and reunites with a child who still believes in him. One last breath of humanity before the tragedy. Hydron doesn't forgive traitors. The fight between them is brutal, dirty, and merciless. Hydron traps Volt, leaving him no chance to escape. Even so, Volt resists until he finally gives in and is swallowed by a dimensional portal. Drago, now mastering the Jet Core, consensus the war is just warming up. Clay is fast-tracking his Apocalypse project, but one final ingredient is missing. The Brawlers' DNA. Link, the remorseful traitor, steals the data and escapes to Earth. Of course, Hydron is right on his tail. The reunion doesn't come with hugs, just punches, tears, and a memory card left behind as a final act of redemption. Alice finds the device and hands it over to Keith. They uncover the full scope of the alternative system plan. Clay is one step away from completing the ultimate weapon. All he needs now is one little thing, Drago. Dan and Drago are fully aware. It's do or die. No resets. No turning back. With Link out of the way, Xenoheld sends Mylene and Shadow to infiltrate the Brawlers' base. Mission assigned, mission accomplished, not quite. It's a full-on trap. Mira is taken hostage. Keith surrenders, or at least pretends to. He lures the duo straight into an ambush inside Bakugan Innerspace, where the Brawlers call the shots. Keith makes a proposal. If they lose, they give up everything. But if they win, the Vexos vanish for good. Mylene agrees, still riding high on overconfidence. Shadow walks straight into a beatdown from Helios. Mylene takes on Keith and Mira, and right in the middle of the chaos, she drops a bombshell. She no longer answers to Xenoheld. She's going solo. Mira takes command. Strategy, heart, and a little bottled up fury do the trick. Mylene is defeated, but before vanishing, she unleashes a sphere that cracks open a massive dimensional portal. Keith and Mira barely make it out alive. The data is safe, but the nightmare is just beginning. The inner space has turned into a nightmare of glitched code. The vortex unleashed by Mylene threatens to swallow everything, even the real world. Marucho races against time. Keith confronts Mylene once again amidst the chaos. But this time, Mylene decides to vanish in style, taking Shadow with her. Back on Vestal, Xenoheld deals with failure. Through torture, Hydron, once again strapped into the Agonizer, finally snaps. He challenges his own father to a final duel, a twisted game of power within the family. Dragonoid Colossus faces off against Farbros. Hydron nearly turns the tide, but Xenoheld activates a system that reflects attacks. Flipping the score, Colossus falls. Hydron loses everything, except a visit from Gus, and he has a plan. Gus arrives with one mission, destroy the alternative. Meanwhile, Teeth is welcomed with cheers by the Brawlers, but the celebration is short-lived. He escapes with the Vestal Destroyer straight to the palace. A one-on-one showdown, Helios MK 2 versus Farbros, but the D2 system gives Xenoheld total control. Gus joins the fray, followed by the Brawlers. The battlefield descends into chaos. Clay activates the cannon. One shot, the sky tears like paper. Keith and Helios barely make it out alive, and that was just a test. Xenoheld now holds a weapon capable of wiping out entire planets. Dr. Michael and Alice piece together a map using the Vexos tracks, but not everyone is ready. Tigrera and Gorham, unable to evolve, retire from the fight. While Keith and Helios keep the Flying Fortress busy, Dan spots an opening, infiltration. With the Succionator, Keith clears a path through the debris. Mira follows close behind, ready to face her own father. Inside the alternative, each corridor is a new kind of hell. spell, Clay triggers a digital trap. Dan and Drago are thrown into a nightmarish world made of data. Amid grotesque horrors and twisted illusions, they blast their way through and locate the reactor. Mira confronts Clay, now nothing more than a mad scientist with a god complex. He refuses to escape, choosing instead to perish with his masterpiece. The reactor is destroyed. The base begins to collapse. Elsewhere, Hydron faces off against Xenoheld in an explosive farewell. Both are buried beneath the rubble. With the fall of the Vestal dynasty, peace finally breathes again, but not for long. In the shadows, new players emerge, and they're coming for the Brawlers. Bayview does have its charm, but Dan barely sets foot in the new city before being thrown into something way bigger. Marucho, now rocking the vibe of a pint-sized visionary entrepreneur, unveils Bakugan Inner Space, a virtual playground where anyone can play hero without getting their sneakers dirty. Jake, Dan's new buddy, a mix of good intentions and zero clue, gets a digital Bakugan, Core Dem. What starts as just another fun afternoon quickly escalates into a preview of the apocalypse when Ren Crawler, a mysterious kid who clearly knows more than he lets on, challenges Dan. The battle between Drago and Leinholt crashes the whole system, literally. Marucho has no choice but to pull the plug before the digital world goes up in virtual flames. But Dan wakes up different. Visions of Bakugans at war start invading his mind. Of course, no one believes him. After all, who dare admit Dan was actually right? Ren might, but he's got plans of his own. The visions weren't delusions. They were echoes of a war already underway, just not in our dimension. It's all happening in a parallel realm called Gundalia. At the heart of the chaos stands Emperor Barodius, who looks like he stepped out of a gothic shampoo commercial, investigating the aftershocks of a mysterious explosion in interspace. Ren decides to drop the bombshell. He's not from Earth. He came from Gundalia with a mission to recruit Dan and the Brawlers as pawns in a galactic chess match. The twist? The so-called enemies are the Nethians, and every fragment Dan has seen is a real glimpse of the destruction that's coming. Before the team can decide whether to believe Ren's story, they're ambushed by Sid Arkel and Lena Isis, sinister twins in disguise. Marucho and Dan face off against manipulation, dirty tricks, and not-so-friendly attempts at virtual assassination. Only a fusion of strategy and battle gear saves the day, for now. While everyone is busy hunting down spies like rare trading cards, Fabi Ashin makes her entrance. Warrior, princess, and, surprise, she turns Ren's story completely on its head. She clashes with Dan in a fierce battle that quickly becomes a stage for major revelations. Gundalia isn't the victim, it's the invader. Her Bakugan, Iron Out, nearly drives Drago into the ground. Even in defeat, Fabia plants a seed of doubt, and it sprouts fast, because Shun, the group's silent ninja, suddenly vanishes. The War of Truths has begun, and trust melts away faster than cheese on a microwave pizza. Jake is still licking his wounds after getting his butt kicked by Mason Brown, but he's had enough. It's time to stop trying to be the new Dan and start being the first Jake. Julie gives him a much-needed dose of truth with one of her signature tough love pep talks. Either find your own style or keep getting beat. Jake takes it to heart. He thinks, reflects, and remembers football, strategy, strength, timing. That's it. Bakugan just found its quarterback. In the rematch against Mason, Cordum shows what a rock hammer really feels like. Jake wins, and more importantly, he finds his place on the team. But the calm? Yeah, it's not gonna last much longer. Players begin vanishing from interspace as if they'd been abducted. When they return, they're like zombies spouting remote-controlled propaganda. Marucho, with a little help from Ren, because even villains like to play nice sometimes, uncovers the truth. It's mind control, courtesy of Gundalia. The bomb drops when he broadcasts the whole thing on the giant screens. Sid and Zenith, ever the loyal henchmen, pounce. The battlefield turns into an all-out war zone. Drago takes on Contest. Ren goes head-to-head with Zenith, and the Brawlers come out on top. But Sid's parting words ring out like a prophecy. This was only the beginning. With the spies exposed and interspace turning into a pressure cooker on the verge of exploding, Jesse Glynn makes his entrance. An eccentric who claims to be from Mythia, but Fabia, with the look of someone who's read the entire script, isn't buying it. She takes action before Dan can even open his mouth, and the clash between Aeronaut and Playtheon becomes a spectacle of battle gear and otherworldly abilities. Jesse tries to steal the spotlight with something called the Lantern Gear Nirvana, but the battle reveals something far more critical. He's a fraud. Worse yet, a spy. Meanwhile, Shun confronts Ren with Fabia's accusations. The response? Silence. The Brawlers' trust, already hanging by a thread, finally collapses. Tired of half-truths, Marucho decides to dig deeper, and the truth doesn't disappoint. Fabia reveals that Gundalia invaded Nifia without provocation. Ren's mission? To recruit the Brawlers through emotional manipulation. Worst of all, Dan's visions weren't warnings. They were cries for help in disguise. Ren Ren is trapped down in a hidden corner and confronted by Marucho. The battle between Aquamos and Linahult is a clash of raw emotion and breathtaking moves. Despite the betrayal, Marucho gives it his all and wins with honor. After his defeat, Ren acknowledges Marucho's potential and offers an alliance, but Marucho refuses.
I would never leave my family for a dishonest poser like you. You got me?
That's when Ren delivers his warning. He hasn't just lost a friend, he's gained a lifelong enemy. Marucho is still reeling from the emotional blow with Fabia, but she returns, bringing with her the classic primal Bakugan from Nethia. No more digitals. These are living, breathing creatures. The synergy with the brawlers is instant, but there's no time to catch a breath. Casey and Taylor, now under mind control, appear like zombie puppets acting on Ren's orders. The battle erupts and spreads quickly. Dan and Shun face off against Taylor and Mason. Meanwhile, Jake and Marucho take on Casey and, yes, Sid, back from the shadows. Thinking quickly, they realize defeating the controlled fighters breaks the spell. It works, but it's too late. Ren has seized full control of inner space, boots the brawlers out, and transforms it into a hostile fortress. The war is no longer digital, it's personal. It's happening here on Earth. The inner space has become an elegant trap. While it looks like a battle-themed amusement park, it's actually being used to recruit kids as soldiers. Like those terms and conditions you accept without reading, except with brainwashing. Dan tries to warn the kids, but he ends up sounding like the uncle who tells you not to trust free Wi-Fi. Fed up with things going south, Jake blows up the physical access points. It works. No one else can get in, but it also locks in those already inside. Marucho unveils a plan worthy of a spy movie. Secret control rooms. Dan and Jake dive into the mission using body shift. But what they find inside isn't the interspace. It's a digital nightmare, crawling with hollow-eyed kids and hypnotized soldiers. Lewin and Scene appear, but now they're nothing more than puppets under Ren's control. During the battle, Dan realizes they're not villains, they're victims. The brawlers set them free. Watching from the shadows, Ren comes to a conclusion that will change everything. Only those who fight of their own free will can unlock true power. The mission now is high risk. Physically breach the server room, all while, on the other side of the galaxy, Barodius begins to suspect Ren and puts him under pressure. And it's not the kind solved with a chat over coffee. Flashbacks reveal Ren's dark past. A descendant of the Shadow Bakugan protectors, raised in darkness, surviving only alongside Linahult. It was Barodius who pulled him out, offering freedom, but at a steep price. Back on Earth, Fabia faces off against Lena and Zenith in a trick-filled battle while Marucho infiltrates the servers. And there, the inevitable happens. He encounters Ren, former allies, almost brothers, now face-to-face in a bitter, silent standoff. Ren still believes the inner space belongs to both of them. Marucho disagrees. To him, it was a sanctuary, not a battlefield. Meanwhile, Fabia is holding her ground until Marucho shows up and rescues her. That's when we find out Marucho managed to install a backdoor into the system, a secret access point, a loophole. Yet the cost was high, and the game has changed. Linus descends to Earth with a single mission, to deliver the element to Princess Fabia. But like any true knight, he arrives too late. The element is no longer in his possession. Worse yet, it's fallen into the wrong hands. This isn't just any mystical artifact, it's the essence of Nethia, capable of creating or destroying entire galaxies, depending on who holds it. And now it's trapped inside Neo's Zipperator, his Bakugan, captured by the Gondalians. Shun joins Linus in a desperate mission to rescue Neo. Together, they face off against Ren and Jesse in a brutal battle. Linus proves why he bears the title of Royal Knight, but Jesse plays dirty. As for Ren, he hesitates. His loyalty wavers, but fear and debt still hold him back. Jesse prevails, and Neo is captured. Defeated, Linus realizes he hasn't just lost the Bakugan. Without even noticing, he handed over the key to the entire galaxy straight into the enemy's hands. Back in Gundalia, the villains proudly display their trophy. Neo, sealed, remains motionless, as if refusing to obey. Barodius grows suspicious and decides to test him. Sid volunteers as the test subject, but in the middle of the battle, something stirs. Neo is reborn, not as a weapon, but as the element itself. Flesh, bone, and flame, and he chooses Drago, or rather, Damn. In a near-divine explosion, the element's power surges into Drago, transforming him into Lumino Dragonoid. Now he feels everything. Planets, stars, even the whisper of nebulas. The universe pulses through him. Dan obliterates Sid with ease. Neo returns to Linus changed, wiser, more distant, like someone who's crossed time and glimpsed the end of all things. Barodius realizes he's lost the element and loses it himself. His new target is Drago, and to capture him, he gives Ren one last chance. With a threat heavier than any order, there's no time to grieve. Nethia is in the line of fire. Fabia calls on the Brawlers. Everyone answers. The war moves forward, but Zenet has a plan. Disguised as Julie, she infiltrates Earth. It almost works, until the real Julie shows up. A chaotic battle erupts in the park. Zenet tries to manipulate Drago with illusions. Dan resists, trusting only the bond they share. Zenet gives it her all to defeat Drago, but Dan counterattacks with Jetcore and takes her down. Zenet returns to Gundalia in defeat. Julie bids farewell with a good luck kiss. Back in Nethia, the truth hits like a punch to the gut. The real target was never just the element, it's the sacred orb, the heart of all Bakugan. They arrive at the Crystal Palace. Heroes. Queen Serena leads them to the sacred shrine. Only the pure-hearted may enter. Marucho learns this by diving right into the water, with elegance. Naturally, the sacred orb pulses with life. Dan and Drago feel a bond that transcends the physical. Fabia explains, the DNA of all Bakugan rests within it. It is the origin of everything. And now, Barodius' target. The attack strikes without warning. The 12 Ordens lead the assault. Nethia's second barrier falls. The world shakes. Dan faces Barodius on the battlefield. The Emperor overpowers Drago for a moment. A blinding light whisks them away. Serena takes action. She names the Brawlers as the Castle Knights. The universal war has begun, and Nethia depends on them. 2 shields had already turned to cosmic dust. Nethia could barely breathe. The third shield was all that stood between the planet and the suffocating grip of the Gundalian Empire, and Barodius, seated on his throne of inflated ego, saw the perfect chance to show the universe who was boss. But it was Gil, the hot-headed brawler with a punch-first, ask-later stare, who kicked protocol to the curb and charged in solo to destroy the last shield. The man was a walking contradiction. Ice in his veins, fire in his soul, and that's no metaphor. That's when the nightmare got a name and a face. The 12 Orders. These weren't just soldiers. They were the legends of the Empire. A squad that made the Avengers look like a high school drama club. Gil and his Krakix, Stoica with his unpredictable Litharus, Erzel and his mirror-like strike flyer, able to reflect enemy attacks, Nurzak, the tough-as-nails old sage with Saboteur, and Kazarina, always disturbingly shadowy, who treated living Bakugans like Frankenstein experiments. A real sweetheart. The planet staggered, but the Castle Knights weren't the type to throw in the towel. Marucho, with his Gigabrain, crafted a bold plan. As 3 enemy ships, Stoica, Kazarina, and Erzel, advanced on Sector D, the team would stage a movie-worthy distraction, buying time for a squad to sneak through the jungle and try to reactivate the second shield. Who signed up for the suicide mission? Marucho, Dan, Drago, with the perfect core blazing on his chest, and Jake, who dives into danger like it's a ball pit. On the front lines, Jake put his flair for drama to good use. He declared himself King of Water before charging Mason. Battle gears roared to life. Meanwhile, Erzel played dirty with his attack copying ability. Copying, like plagiarism with special effects, with the front drawing all the fire and taking hits in style. Amid the chaos, one of the allies ended up frozen like a human popsicle, courtesy of the villains with a flair for the frostier side of the force. But Jake and crew hit back in kind, or rather in ice. With the enemies temporarily chilled, Dan seized the chance to press on in his race against time. The jumble wasn't helping. It was practically a deranged character in the story. Every step brought a new trap, and as if that wasn't enough, they reached a lake that, according to local legend, only let those with a pure heart cross. Dan, of course, told mysticism to take a hike and found a more practical way across. Because who's got time for purity when the planet's about to go up in smoke? Further ahead, another gift from Mother Nature. Giant carnivorous flowers known as blooming buttercups. Cute name. Killer instincts. They ran like there was no tomorrow. And frankly, there wasn't. When Fabia spotted the generator, it looked like they might finally catch a break, until Stoica and Jesse crashed the party. They knew Dan was hiding something, and they wanted answers. Dan then activated his plan B. Shun disappeared into the underbrush, faking a retreat. Dan and Fabia held the stage. Jesse, ever the drama king, thought he was the star of the final act. The battle between him and Fabia was a tactical showcase, complete with a command card that reset the board, but Fabia made it clear who was really in command. Meanwhile, Stoica noticed the game changer. Dan didn't have Drago with him. Bingo. The dragon was with Shun, taking the alternate route. At that point, the plan wasn't just smart, it was straight up slick. With the light exposed, but already too late, Dan and Fabia unleashed combo attacks worthy of a season finale. Jesse fell, and the generator was theirs. But of course, nothing's ever that simple. Drago reached the generator building, only to find it swarming with heavily armed sentries. And And to make things worse, Kazarina and Lena showed up, because the war for the cores was far from over. Drago has been kidnapped, not by accident or mistake. It was a well-laid trap by the Gundalians. Dan and Shun, wasting no time mourning, head straight into the heart of the problem, the power core facility, now crawling with alien forces. Shun, in full-on stealth ninja rage mode, slips into the shadows and disables security like he's changing a t-shirt. Inside the complex, they confront Kazarina, who makes sure to rub it in. Drago is down to just 1,000 points. The tension peaks with the arrival of Phosphos, but Hawktor crashes the party, and the battle arena is set. While Dan and Hawktor keep the enemies busy, Shun operates in the background, and Drago's core begins to pulse. Power surges back, the shield reactivates, and Nethia breathes again. But joy doesn't last long in Gundalia. Kazarina, with the icy cruelty of a soap opera villain, executes Lena right in front of Barodius. It's not punishment, it's a warning. Betrayal within the Empire is only beginning. The 12 Ordeens are on the ropes. Jesse, now a fugitive with a flair for the dramatic, is squarely in Stilica's crosshairs, and the order is clear. Bring him back, dead or alive. Jake, meanwhile, decides that following orders is for cowards, blatantly defying Dan without batting an eye. Lucky for him, he crosses paths with Fabia, and the two quickly prove to be more effective than most official pairs. True to his theatrical soul, Jesse sets the stage for his final act, a showdown against Fabia and Jake. Ren watches in silence, the weight of judgment in his gaze. Jesse loses, of course, and surrenders. But that surrender is just a dress rehearsal for the end. Stolica gives the command, and Ren, swallowing what little humanity he had left, executes his friend. A moral scar that won't fade. Meanwhile, the Brawlers grow stronger, maybe because they still allow themselves to feel. Kazarina and Nurzak are dispatched to investigate the shield. Between scans, Nurzak decides it's time for some hard truths. According to the late father of Barodius, the sacred orb isn't just unstable, it's ravenous. Barodius, oblivious to caution, wants more. He seeks to craft the perfect Bakugan. Mason and Avior aren't on board with that plan and take off, officially deserting. Marucho and Fabia cross paths with them, but what was supposed to be a mere confrontation turns into utter chaos. The sacred orb reacts poorly to this internal drama and unleashes a dimensional tornado on the field. With a rare moment of clarity, Nurzak calls for a retreat. The entity known as the sacred orb doesn't like it when friends fight, and as the magical collapse escalates, Nurzak and Kazarina exchange silent glances, the kind of alliance forged only when everything is about to fall apart. Barodius decides it's time to clean house. He gives Ren the dirty job of spying on Nurzak, disguise and poison, all in one neat package. Meanwhile, Gil takes the lead on an attack against the shield, alongside Contestir and Erzel. The mission? Impress the Emperor. The result? A total disaster. Dan and Drago have zero tolerance for foolish ambition. Gil returns humiliated and vents his frustration on the only thing he still has control over. He executes Contestir. Erzel watches helplessly, realizing too late that loyalty for Stannis is a terrible investment, and as if that weren't enough, Gil sends Contestir, disguised as Nurzak, to spy on Kazarina. It's a masquerade ball, and no one's getting out clean. Nurzak makes a bold move. He offers peace and hands over the switch code, the key to awakening the dormant power of the sacred orb. But Kazarina has other plans. She's already brainwashed half of Barodius' army. Barodius, no fool, is well aware of it all, thanks to Gil. And now he's ready to play God, using living soldiers as pawns on his cosmic chessboard. At the so-called Peace Summit, everything falls apart. Nurzak and Barodius lock eyes. The battlefield is set. Saboteur and Daruk face off in a colossal duel. Nurzak pulls out his trump card, Silent Stalker, and pushed to the brink, unleashes darkest matter. A gravitational explosion follows. Game over. Daruk survives. As for Nurzak, he vanishes into the void. The rebellion disappears with him. The sacred orb watches in silence and likely disapproves. With Nurzak off the board, Barodius makes his move. Kazarina vows to complete the Exocore in 3 days, an ambitious goal if you're completely insane. Meanwhile, Gil is assigned to play the decoy, but the skirmishes unveil a chilling truth. The Gundalian soldiers are actually kids from interspace, now turned into mind-controlled zombies. Dan freezes. How can he fight children he once knew? Ren returns to Earth with orders to recruit more. Julie, desperate to protect the kids, accidentally gives away crucial intel. In the next battle, Dan recognizes a familiar face among the enemy, and the ground vanishes beneath his feet. Assault vehicles storm storm the arena, the Nethians retaliate with the Wraithius, a battle machine powered by Drago. But that's not what turns the tide. One of the children breaks free from the mind control, and that changes everything. Ren wakes up to a storm of scrambled memories. Nurzak, the sacred orb, the price of loyalty, all of it throbs in his mind like a relentless alarm. Barodius pushes forward with his campaign against the shield, but Kazarina has her own agenda. Convert more soldiers using the Exocore. Direct orders? What orders? Leinhalt, ever silent, reveals his true quest to understand his place in the world, beyond the label of darkest Bakugan. Ren faces Dan once again, but this time Dan doesn't argue. He convinces, and Ren listens. Listens with the kind of focus only someone in total crisis can muster. Memories of childhood, of abandonment, of caring for Leinhalt as if he were all that remained. All of it crashes into the image of Syth, who appears, saves Ren, and dies. With his final breath, Syth plants the ultimate seed of doubt Ren needed to bloom. And though Ren returns to Gundalia, something essential has shifted. He's no longer theirs. Ren no longer swallows lies like sugarless coffee. Tired of being just a pawn on Barodius' chessboard, he finally decides to confront the Emperor, the same one who smiles with his mouth but betrays with his eyes. Ren wants answers about his allies. He wants the truth. But all he gets are hollow promises, wrapped in speeches of glory he no longer believes. Meanwhile, Kazarina completes her technological Frankenstein, the Exocore. Barodius, drunk with power, merges with Dark Colossus, and sets out to reduce Nethia to stardust. The second shield falls like it's made of tinfoil. One heavy blow, and the planet bleeds. Ren decides he's had enough. He breaks away from the Emperor, from the lies, and from the guilt. He frees Leinhalt from control and flips the script. He declares his true loyalty, not to a throne, but to those who believed in him, even when he didn't know who he was anymore. For the first time, Ren chooses his side, and he chooses right. Deep within Gundalia, Ren spots a dragonfly. A mere bug, yet it thrives where nothing else should. And in that moment, he realizes, maybe there's still hope. He cries out to the world. He will no longer be a war dog for the Empire. Barodius, true to every tyrant's nature, answers with fury. He orders the immediate execution of all traitors. The battle is hopelessly one-sided. The Exocore is a beast, and Ren and Leinhalt can barely stay on their feet. But then it happens. Leinhalt awakens an ancient force, a forbidden power capable of slicing through planets like paper. Dragonoid Colossus appears just in time to contain the looming destruction, and when the dust settles, the truth stings. Leinhalt is far too dangerous to remain. He chooses exile, but Dan won't stand for it. He believes even the darkest of powers can become a force for good, if wielded with purpose. Ren returns to Nethia, but the castle still sees him as a threat. The shield doesn't lie. Dan tries to reason with them, but Fabia has too many scars to trust so easily. Aeronaut, her late fiance's partner, suffered under the Gundalians. The princess lays down a condition, a duel. If Ren loses, he's banished for good. Even with Leinhalt exhausted, Ren accepts. When his partner falls, Ren calls on Rubinoid, Sid's Bakugan, a symbol of memory, of a promise, of redemption. Ren shields Rubinoid with his own body. It's a simple gesture, but it speaks louder than 1,000 words. Fabia understands, and little by little, the past begins to heal. With Ren now allied with the Nethian warriors, everything seemed to be falling into place, until a magnetic storm knocked out the radars and brought with it a boy named Robin. He speaks of a sister trapped in Gundalia. He begs for help. Jake is moved. He goes after him, alone, and walks right into a trap. Of course, Kazarina was behind it all. The outcome, Jake captured and taken to Gundalia, but then he comes back, too quickly, too freely, and far too different. Dan wants to believe it's really him, but Shun sees it. Something's not right. Jake starts acting strange, really strange. He suggests technical upgrades to the shield, something he's never understood. Shun gets suspicious. Jake plays it off, but when he tries to sabotage everything, he gets caught. Dan set a trap. The truth hurts. Jake was captured, brainwashed, turned into a living weapon. So was Cordem. Now they fight like Kazarina's warhounds. Dan refuses to give up. He throws everything he has into the fight. For a moment, Jake falters. He murmurs, "We're friends." But it's not enough. Kazarina arrives, cold as ever, and takes her creations away. Dan makes a decision. He and Drago are heading to Gundalia alone. Dan and Drago are pulled into a parallel dimension. There, they encounter Dragonoid Colossus, the guardian of the sacred orb. A primordial truth is revealed. Drago and Darak are descendants of the very first Bakugan, but only one can reach the ultimate evolution. They battle the guardian and win. Drago then evolves into Pyrus Blitz Dragonoid. Back in the real world, they return with Nurzak and Mason, former Gundalians who are now ready to switch sides. Their next destination, Kazarina's lair. Upon arrival, the group splits up. Dan, Marucho, and Shun head straight for the castle. Ren, Fabia, Nurzak, and Mason infiltrate Kazarina's laboratory. Dragonoid Colossus clears a path. Herodias, always one step ahead, separates Dan from the others. Marucho and Shun face deadly battles, while Dan, now alone, confronts Herodias. And he learns the worst. Jake is no longer just a prisoner. He's become someone else. Dan faces Herodias. Derek is a force of nature, but Drago, now evolved, is up to the challenge. In the heat of battle, something awakens. A perfect connection between Dan and Drago. The results? A new form, a new power, and Derek is defeated. Herodias has been vanquished and agrees to return Jake. But what comes back is no longer Jake. It's a soulless Gundalian warrior, and he attacks Dan without hesitation. Inside the lab, Fabia and Nurzak face off against Kazarina and Stoica. Nurzak reveals a painful truth from his past. A daughter lost due to miscalculated decisions. When Stoica floods the battlefield, Nurzak sacrifices himself to save Fabia. His final thought is of Gloria. Meanwhile, Red and Mason find their friends under mind control. Dan is locked inside an electrified cell, and Jake has become a walking nightmare, with allies turning into enemies. The Brawlers situation is on the verge of collapse. Marucho and Shun attempt to rescue Jake, but Kazarina has other plans. She wants Drago's DNA to evolve Daruk. Marucho finds Jake in the middle of a dark ceremony, handing over Brawlers' data. He tries to reach his old friend through memories. For a moment, it almost works, but the brainwashing runs too deep. Jake, ruthless, strikes. The castle crumbles. Marucho retreats, and Jake remains in the shadows. Hopelessly, irrevocably, Nurzak's hideout was silent, yet heavy with tension. The Brawlers struggled to catch their breath amidst the emotional rubble left by Dan and Drago's absence. Elsewhere, in a shadow-cloaked laboratory, Kazarina was indulging in a kind of science that would have made even Frankenstein beg her to stop. With Drago's DNA in hand, she created something no one should have ever dared to: Phantom Daruk, a hybrid monster, powerful enough to shatter even the laws of physics in Nethia, and the planet's third protective barrier reduced to dust. As Herodias marched with his new creation, Fabia pressed on in her search for Nurzak, and the rest of the group moved to rescue Dan. Deep beneath the castle, Kazarina prepared to execute Dan using a hypnotized Jake, but the Brawlers arrived, turning the castle into a war zone. Walls were obliterated by explosions, as monsters of every imaginable form clashed in narrow corridors. Jake's eyes were blank, but his heart, well, that still recognized Dan. In the middle of the fight, a memory here, a line there. Cracks began to form in the armor of hypnosis. It wasn't about who was stronger, it was about who remembered. Meanwhile, Fabia finally found Nurzak alive, and of course just as stubborn as ever. Aeronaut came clean, revealing his connection to Jin, her former partner. Pain turned into strength. Lumagrowl fell. Kazarina fled, but there was no time for smiles. Nethia's third barrier had been broken. Phantom Daruk soared through the skies like a harbinger. Herodias was coming, and Kazarina still had scores to settle with the Brawlers before the final battle. Nethia was crumbling, physically and emotionally. Phantom Daruk wasn't fighting, he was obliterating. Knights fell like autumn leaves. Children ran, unsure whether they were fleeing or simply delaying the inevitable. Drago Colossus tried to hold his ground, but it was like stopping an avalanche with bare hands. Each strike left deep scars. The retreat was forced, morale in ruins. Meanwhile, over in Gundalia, even the villains had grown weary. Gil, until then just another obedient lackey, had finally had enough. He faced Kazarina, and there were no words. She fell, and with her, every spell she ever cast crumbled too. A poetic side effect. Jake, Jesse, and Ren were all free. But freedom didn't mean victory. Phantom Daruk was still a wall of destruction. And when Herodias smiled on the battlefield, it wasn't joy. It was the grin of someone convinced they had already won. But this war still had a few tricks up its sleeve. And the Brawlers, they weren't going down without a roar. The decisive battle escalates as Daruk unleashes his devastating power, annihilating the Castle Knights with a single photon gladiator strike. Meanwhile, the Battle Brawlers race to escape aboard an underground vessel, only to be pursued by Herodias' soldiers. During the escape, Fabia and her allies face multiple assaults, including the lethal Deadly Nebulous, but manage to counter with offering armor and Mirage Fist, securing a temporary escape route. The conflict worsens when Mason makes an unexpected return, revealing he's fully recovered, and Nurzak appears as an unlikely ally. Tension reaches new heights when Gil attempts to deceive Herodias by accusing Fabia of killing Kazarina, but the scheme backfires. Herodias uncovers the lie and punishes him with Chaos Magnalia. Forced to retreat, Gil and Chimera flee before the wrath of their former master. The world trembled battlefield. Every step Phantom Darek took felt like a death sentence. The brawlers had split up. Dan and Colossus Dragonoid headed straight for the boss, Barodius. As chaos spread, Queen Serena stood firm on her throne. Barodius arrived, demanding the orb. When she refused, he launched his attack, but before blood could be spilled, a blinding light, an overwhelming explosion of energy engulfed the hall. Dan and Barodius vanished. The battlefield had shifted, and the true end, or beginning, was near. Nothing made sense in that new place. There was too much light, too much silence. There stood Code Eve, the entity behind the sacred orb, and the universe of the Bakugan itself. The revelation hit like an avalanche. Drago and Darek were direct descendants of the original dragons. Dan and Barodius, pieces on the same chessboard, bound by codes written long before time began. In that abstract battlefield, where reality bent to the will of its fighters, Drago fell. But Dan refused to accept it, and as always, when one of them falls, the other rises. Drago evolved. Titanium Dragonoid was born. Code Eve offered Dan the throne of existence. He turned it down. Friendship still meant more than any throne. The war ended. Ren stayed in Gundalia. Mason became a knight. The brawlers went home, exhausted, but alive. A few months had passed. Dan had become the king of Bakugan Inner Space, a platform where anyone could battle. A new world was taking shape, but the calm was merely the soundtrack to something bigger on the horizon. Anubius and Selen entered the game, and they weren't here to play around. Anubius, in particular, seemed to have a personal vendetta against Dan. Drago began acting strange. Visions. A masked figure making cryptic demands. The pressure grew so intense that Drago nearly destroyed the arena during a battle. Something was wrong. Dan chose to step back, to train, to figure out what had changed. But in the distance, shadows were stirring. And this time, the battles wouldn't just be for the championship title. Drago, once the embodiment of strength and loyalty, has become a ticking time bomb. Dan learns this the hard way. While Marucho faces off against Jack under the glaring lights of the main arena, Dan hides away in a forgotten corner of the inner space, trying to tame the beast his friend has become. But tame might not be the right word. From the chaos, something else is born. Zenthon, a mech Togen with all the subtlety of a hurricane on a rampage. Zenthon doesn't ask questions, doesn't hesitate, and certainly doesn't forgive. He strikes at everything in sight, including supposed allies. Dan tries to rein him in, but no one seems to grasp the seriousness of what's unfolding. Even Anubius and Selen show up to capitalize on the chaos. Just when it looks like a full-on massacre is about to erupt, Zenthon vanishes without a trace, as if he just remembered he left the oven on. The takeaway? One thing is clear. Zenthon is part of Drago, and Drago is becoming less and less a part of Dan. Dan becomes a master of omission. Zenthon? Never heard of it. And with every lie he tells Shun and Marucho, the rift between the Battle Brawlers widens into a canyon. Anubius, always ready to pounce, sees his chance. He accuses Dan of cowardice in public, manipulates the media, and challenges him again. Stubborn as a jammed door, Dan accepts. But now, his fear of unleashing Zenthon becomes a shackle. Dan holds back. He hesitates. And Anubius, with all the grace of a sedated rhino, crushes him in the arena. Easily, utterly. The crowd sees a loser. Anubius sees a failure. Dan, for the first time, sees danger, and it's himself. Shun can't take the secrets anymore. He confronts Dan, demanding he step away from the battles. Marucho, usually the Switzerland of the group, sides with Shun. The result? Dan gets kicked off his own team. Feeling betrayed and fired up, Dan heads straight into isolation with Drago. Obsession becomes routine. Training turns into self-inflicted torture. Zenthon shows up again, like an energy stalker that just won't quit. Meanwhile, Selen proposes a tag team battle. Shun and Dan, side by side, like nothing ever happened. The tension, you could slice it with a Bakugan. During the match, Dan almost loses control again, but Shun, still pissed, steps up and saves the day. Trust gone. Shun makes it clear. He no longer believes in Dan. It's the official end of the Battle Brawlers. Now emotionally isolated, Dan becomes an easy target. Selen swoops in with a "I understand you" speech, while Anubius sneaks in to plant seeds of doubt like a gardener of paranoia. The cherry on top? The Dry Twisters. 3 brawlers with tactics so dirty, they'd make a soap opera villain blush. They crush Shun and Marucho without breaking a sweat. And of course, Anubius shows up with his signature ego savior flair, wiping out the trio like it's child's play. The message is crystal clear. Without Dan, the team is nothing, and from a distance, Dan finally gets it. The problem wasn't just about power. The problem was him. Losing friends wasn't enough. Now Dan is losing sleep. Nightmares featuring a mysterious entity named Magmel begin to erode what little sanity he had left. Drago dreams too. Something deeper is connecting them, and it's not just shared trauma. Meanwhile, in the inner space, Dan grows increasingly withdrawn. The pressure mounts. Training turns into psychological torment. And in the ring against Anubius, everything falls apart. Magmel takes control. Zenthon erupts from within Dan like a ravenous wraith, attacking without mercy. Disqualified. Title lost. Control shattered. And worst of all, identity annihilated. Dan vanishes along with Drago into the dead silence of the interspace. The havoc wreaked by Dan and Drago leaves the interspace in total disarray. Branded as cheaters, the duo vanishes as if they never existed. Tired of waiting, Shun goes solo. Meanwhile, Anubius is on a roll, effortlessly crushing the Bash Brothers like it's just a warm-up. But the game takes a dark turn when a shadowy figure decides to play God, bestowing Chaos Bakugan upon the defeated brothers, turning them into savage beasts hell-bent on destruction. At the same time, Dylan unveils the Baku Nanos, a cutting-edge tech that supercharges Bakugan, but at the cost of sanity and control. Naturally, the Bash Brothers return more unhinged than ever, wreaking havoc on everything in sight. Marucho takes a hit, forcing Shun and Talene to step in. Facing brute force and dangerously unstable tech, Shun proves that brains and experience still count. They win the hard way, but something far bigger is looming. Whatever calm there was, if any, is now officially dead. The stage is set for the next explosion. With Shun now reigning over the Earth territory in a cold, ruthless winning streak, Dan and Drago seize the relative calm to slip away to New Vestroia. The plan was simple: train without an audience, without pressure, just the man, the dragon, and their newfound powers. But New Vestroia was no longer the familiar backyard of old adventures. Even the native Bakugan now looked at outsiders with suspicion, and it was in this hostile setting that Amazon made his entrance. A cocky kid, with the swagger of someone who thinks he's the main character from birth. His mentor, none other than Preus, the eternal chatterbox who once fought alongside the Brawlers. With a blend of nostalgia and concern, Preus asks Dan to accept the boy's challenge. Dan hesitates, not out of fear of Amazon, but fear of himself, or rather, what Drago becomes when things spiral out of control. Once the battle is accepted, the show begins. Amazon is bold, aggressive, nearly reckless, and Drago holds back until he simply can't anymore. The kid's taunts spark the flame, and the flame becomes an inferno. Drago erupts in an uncontrolled power surge, haunted by dark visions and blind attacks that hit even allies. The result? A humiliating defeat. Drago, unconscious, Dan, shattered. As the duo recovers, each in their own solitude, a new character steps into the scene, a shadowy, mysterious emissary, the kind that doesn't ask for permission. He came for Dan and Drago, and it wasn't an invitation. It was an order, not his own, but from his master. While Dan and Drago struggle to understand where their bond went wrong, each decides to walk their own path. Training separately seems like a solid plan, until Amazon shows up again. The kid still wants to prove he won fair and square, as if the previous mess wasn't enough. Preus, ever the frustrated mentor, tries to knock some sense into his pupil, but the boy only has one thing on his mind: a rematch. Amid this tension, the emissary makes his move. His name? Anubius. His target? Dan and Drago. And he's not alone. He brings a dark dragonoid and a mectagon he summons as easily as hailing a cab. Preus tries to stop him. When Drago returns, it's to find his friend injured. Worse, Dan's mind is once again overwhelmed by shadowy visions. Drago snaps. He lashes out at everything, at everyone, even Preus, even Dan. But this time, something cuts through. A spark. Dan doesn't give up. Their emotional connection rises above the chaos. Drago hears it. In perfect sync like never before, they take Anubius down. But the real win isn't just the victory, it's what it reveals. The issue was never too much power. It was the lack of harmony. Together, they thrive. Apart, they're just chaos waiting to erupt. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Shun continues his solitary crusade, unstoppable, relentless, and to Marucho's eyes, increasingly unrecognizable. Shun's leadership has turned into a silent dictatorship. He doesn't sleep, he doesn't rest, he listens to no one. Marucho tries to warn him, ignored, so he does the unthinkable, challenges his own partner. Meanwhile, two international reinforcements arrive. Age from Gandalia and Rafe, sent by Nethia. They came expecting heroes. What they found was a team in shambles, and a dangerously unstable leader. During the most chaotic battle royale so far, emotions run high. A Mechtogen appears, summoned by emotional imbalance. Talene and Shun, trying to contain the damage, forge their own Mechtogen and face the beast, but the battle comes at a cost. Paige and Rafe step in to restore order, explaining what everyone pretended not to know. Mechtogen aren't enemies, they're symptoms, signs of a broken bond between Bakugan and partner, and they leave a troubling message. Anubius and Selen already master techniques techniques to manipulate these creatures. Forced to face the truth, Shun steps back, but as the dust settles, a greater quake begins. Marucho's father wants him to quit being a battler. He wants his son to become an executive. Caught between the boardroom and the battlefield, Marucho faces an existential crisis. Tristar, ever eloquent and a bit dramatic, delivers an Oscar-worthy monologue. He searched for years to find a partner with the right heart, and that someone is Marucho. With that in mind, the boy decides to prove that strategy trumps technology. He faces an opponent armed with Baku Nanos and wins using intelligence and emotional synergy. The message is crystal clear. It's not what you use, it's how you use it. Meanwhile, in New Vestroia, Dan and Drago finally manage to communicate with Zenthon. The barrier is broken, but just as every good script knows when to drop a cold shower, Wyvern appears spiritually with an unsettling message. The visions aren't delusions, they're premonitions. Dan and Drago dive into their own minds, and that's not a metaphor, it's literal. Amid memories and fragments, they rediscover their encounter with Code Eve, the creator of all Bakugan. And then comes the bombshell. Drago and Daruk were the first ones she ever created. They are the original twins. Drago's latest evolution brings with it the same symptoms seen in his visions. In short, the power Drago received might be beyond the limits of any living being, and it's tearing him apart from the inside. Back on Earth, Shun keeps winning, but the emptiness only grows. During an urban battle royale, multiple Mechtagon appear, a direct result of collective imbalance. Talene and Shun even summon their own to try to contain the chaos, but they fail. The city is nearly reduced to ashes. Only through the team's unity, Rafe, Paige, Marucho, all of them, is disaster averted. And even after the dust settles, the emotional damage lingers. Paige and Rafe earn the team's respect, but the truth is, the Brawlers' struggles go far beyond victory or defeat. They're fighting not to lose themselves. Shun is a shadow of his former self, worn out, exhausted, practically a ninja zombie from spending way too much time inside Bakugan interspace. Marucho tries to play the good Samaritan this time, but he's met with snappy comebacks and a classic "I don't need help" worthy of a shonen protagonist in the middle of an existential meltdown. Meanwhile, light years away, Dan and Drago dive into a couple's therapy session with their memories and start realizing they're way more entangled with this so-called Code Eve than they ever imagined. Suddenly, date and key aren't just cryptic terms. They're starting to make some eerie kind of sense. Totally not suspicious, right? But this magical bond between Drago and Code Eve comes at a price. Those visions they've been having? Yeah, not just random flashes. They're sneak peeks into an alternate reality where things went really bad. Back on Earth, Marucho and Shun finally let out everything they've been bottling up by throwing punches. But this isn't your average squabble. It's the kind that mixes fists, tears, guilt, and a moral slap in the face. In the end, it's Marucho who loses the battle, but the real lesson comes from Shun, who finally understands that trying to carry the world on your shoulders isn't noble. It's just plain stupid. They make up, find common ground, and come out stronger, as tight-knit as a family in a butter commercial. In the shadows, Mag Mel watches it all go down like he's binge-watching a reality show, loving every second. The stronger the team gets, the more delicious it'll be when he swoops in to steal their powers. And he's already sent Anubius off to New Vestroia with a clear mission: capture the key and the gate. Dan and Drago are now legendary grade collectibles, and they're worth their weight in gold. Guess who's back in New Vestroia? Selen. Apparently Mag Mel doesn't trust just one lackey to snatch the Doom artifacts, and Selen's not here for a sightseeing tour. She proves she's the queen of multitasking, controlling multiple Mechtogen at once. Dan and Drago arrive just in time to save the day, but Selen decides to play some good old intergalactic gaslighting, trying to push Drago into becoming the monster he fears so much. Too bad for her. These two didn't fall off the turnip truck yesterday. Joined by Zenthon, yes, that mysterious being who finally learns how to speak, they go full Power Rangers and form the Mechtogan Titan. The result? Selen gets stylishly obliterated. Before retreating, she drops a few ominous one-liners that leave Dan with a galaxy-sized bug in his ear. Meanwhile, back on Earth, chaos takes no holidays. Shadow Bakugan start popping up in inner space, and they're out for mayhem. Things spiral out of control. Bakugan inner space turns into a full-blown digital apocalypse, with Chaos Bakugan erupting like a biblical plague. Total evacuation, panic everywhere, people deleting files like they're covering their tracks. Marucho, now stepping into the role of tragic hero, makes the hard call: start deleting entire sectors of the platform to stop the spread. But Team Anubius is stuck right in the heart of the exclusion zone. The choice: save the team or save the system. Just before the moral bomb drops, an unexpected figure appears: Spectra, alongside a Helios darker than a villain's browsing history. He flips the script, rescues the stranded, and leaves everyone wondering whether to say thanks or run. But there's no time to decide. Rampaging Mechtagon burst onto the scene, born from the Brawlers' deepest turmoil. Selen returns, dragging 3 beasts behind her like leashed nightmares. Everything shifts when a surge of familiar energy tears across the sky. Dan and Drago are back, just when the world needed them most. On the other side of the multiverse, Magmel smiles. Chaos is his feast, and he's about to binge. Dan comes back acting like he owns the place, but the team's vibe is colder than a hug from your ex. He tries to reclaim the leadership role with the confidence of someone who never makes mistakes, but Paige, Rafe, and even Marucho, the nicest one in the bunch, quickly put him in check. And when it's revealed that Dan has a psychic connection with Magmel, things just got way more complicated. Dan insists on leading a mission, and Zenthon, who used to be his personal boogeyman on a leash, throws a tantrum and turns on his own allies. Pathetic? Yes. Alarming? Absolutely. The cherry on top is Magmel's physical manifestation, proving the psychic link goes both ways. He can control Dan like a puppet. The battle spirals into a full-blown disaster, with the brawlers breaking down emotionally in real time. Spectra realizes something is seriously wrong with Dan. Trust in their once solid leader shatters, but before things get worse, a distress call interrupts the drama. Gundalia Paige's homeland is under siege by Chaos Bakugan. Gundalia looks like the set of a post-apocalyptic movie. Ruins, smoke, and senseless destruction courtesy of Magmel and his sinister partner, Razinoid. Their target, the heart of the capital, the royal palace. Though no one believes him anymore, Dan has a vision revealing the enemy's route. And against everyone's better judgment, Ren decides to trust him, but it was all a setup. Magmel was linked to Dan's mind and used every thought like a GPS. The ambush becomes a trap within a trap. In the chaos that follows, not even the combined strength of Dan, Drago, and Zenthon can hurt Magmel for real. Their bond becomes so overwhelming that Dan starts to spiral. Pain, guilt, everything hitting him at once. Just when defeat seems inevitable, the castle knights show up like armored guardian angels. They save the team, but doubt has already taken root. Is Dan more of a threat than an ally now? As Magmel retreats, laughing like a classic villain, one thing becomes clear. He doesn't need to capture the key or the gate just yet, as long as he keeps spying on Dan, his favorite zombie spy. The Chaos Bakugan troops are marching straight into the heart of Gundalia, like it's a stroll through the park, only with explosions, screaming, and a side of apocalypse. The only thing standing between them and Nifia is a dimensional transporter that looks flimsier than a reality show romance. Dan, of course, wants to lead the charge, because he's Dan, the guy who owns the ball, but Marucho, still using his brain, shuts down the heroic impulse. The mental connection with Magmel has turned into a ticking time bomb, and as usual Dan loses it, snaps, and nearly roundhouse kicks Shun. Just your typical friendly vibes. Meanwhile, Dan's nightmare with teeth, Magmel, takes another stroll through his mind, whispering the usual cryptic nonsense about a key and a gate. Same stuff that mysterious girl in Nuvastroya was going on about. The result? Dan decides to play the lone wolf. Shun, tired of being the babysitter, challenges him to a duel. But before the Bakugan UFC takes off, a mystery brawler with a thirst for battle jumps in. The two team up, win, and she vanishes like an ex who left your message on read. Back at HQ, Marucho, our resident tech nerd, whips up a digital hack that boosts the firepower of the team's vehicles. Dan, in a rare moment of clarity, realizes the lone hero act isn't cutting it and rejoins the crew. And just then, Ren shows up to drop the chaos cherry on top. Paige and Rafe have gone full kamikaze and are chasing after Magmel on their own. Gundalia has turned into a hellish amusement park, and even the castle knights are getting steamrolled by the chaos like clueless interns on their first day. Dan and Drago manage to rescue Paige and Rafe in the middle of the mayhem. That's when the bombshell drops. Magmel isn't just in it for the fight. He's after Dan and Drago because they hold the key and the portal. The last piece is he needs to be reborn as the ultimate demon. The key, Drago's mutated DNA, infected by Code Eve. The portal, the original Bakugan DNA, also altered. Magmel and Razinoid only have beta versions of this, which is why they keep haunting Dan's mind like nightmare X's. During the battle that follows, Magmel unleashes his Mechtagan, but this time, the brawlers play co-op style and share their powers with their friends. The result? Everyone gets their own Mechtagan, a synchronized destruction party. They manage to drive Magmel out and save Gundalia, but Drago feels it deep in his core. Part of his power was ripped away. Magmel and Razinoid are still alive. Worse, they're powered up. Bakugan inner space has turned into a glitch-ridden hellscape. The system's freezing, teleportation causes actual pain, and pixelated chaos reigns everywhere. Imagine a Black Friday, but with digital demons and deadly battles. That's where Dylan comes in, that overlooked NPC nobody ever paid attention to, but turns out he's actually the system's AI, and he reveals that Interspace has evolved alongside the fighter's growing power. Ironically, that very progress ended up feeding Mag Mel with power. Yep, the Brawler spent the entire series unknowingly training the villain. Then comes another gut punch. Anubius and Selen, they're not even human. They're creations of Mag Mel. That's right, Soon and Chris's so-called inspiring mentors were nothing but puppets, programmed with pomp and circumstance. A full-blown existential crisis hits, but there's no time for drama. Anubius and Selen charge into battle, and the clash is epic. The Brawlers come out on top, taking down the emergency access point in the process. And to wrap up this digital apocalypse in style, it starts raining, because if there's one thing worse than virtual chaos, it's supernatural weather. Selen returns, supposedly defeated and repentant. Soon and Chris fall for her charm, pleading for their former master's redemption. Shun, he just watches, wearing the look of someone who already read the final script. Selen claims she was betrayed by Mag Mel, lost her Bakugan and Mektugan, and was nearly Spyron's lunch, until someone saved her. She seems sincere, especially after helping during an enemy attack and earning a bit of trust. But like any good story featuring a manipulative ex-protege, it's all a setup. Dan goes to meet her alone, ignoring Shun's warnings. She steals Dan's key with a low-blow emotional ploy. The truth comes out. Selen was never exiled. It was all a performance. She even mocks Soon and Chris, calling them gullible puppets tricked by pathetic human emotions. And now, with the key in hand, she hands everything over to Mag Mel, who keeps her alive only to drain her energy, because nothing screams main villain louder than turning your allies into disposable batteries. Mag Mel is now the ultimate boss. Obsessed beyond reason, Anubius kidnaps Noah just to force a duel with Dan. The clash is brutal, with Anubius unveiling a new, mutated power, a fusion of Chaos and Aqua Bakugan. Both summon their Mektogan to the battlefield. The fight turns into complete chaos. Safety protocols, long gone. Common sense didn't even bother to show up. At the height of the destruction, Mag Mel decides he's had enough. He appears, absorbs all of Anubius's powers, and tosses him aside like recyclable trash. Now Mag Mel and Razanoid enter full-on final boss mode, unlimited power, villainy dialed to 11, and their universal domination plan about to go live. On the other side, a bunch of traumatized teenagers trying to save the universe with courage, Bakugan, and absolutely no plan B. The Bakugan interspace is collapsing, and the Brawlers, trapped right in the middle of the chaos with no way out. Mag Mel, now practically a god of chaos, plans to use that digital limbo as a springboard to invade Earth. Every access point, gone. Literally. Dan, because of course it has to be him, decides to make one final psychic link with Mag Mel. Yes, that same link that nearly fried his brain last time. The plan? Mentally connect with the most dangerous enemy in the universe. Just hearing the idea makes everyone almost lose it, but Dan insists it's either this or wait around to be wiped out like extras in a disaster movie. Inside Mag Mel's mind, Dan uncovers the juicy truth. Mag Mel is actually Barodius, only now he's supercharged by a demonic upgrade from the Sacred Orb, a Barodius 2.0 with rage issues, a bloated ego, and the power to trigger an apocalypse with a blink. The result? Dan and Drago get wrecked in the astral realm and booted out of the mental link without warning. Meanwhile, in the real world, or what's left of it, Soon and Chris try to pick up the pieces after Selen's betrayal, and Marucho racks his brain for an escape route from the interspace, and fails, big time. Salvation comes from the most unlikely place. Dylan, the sweet-voiced AI with shady motives, shows up with a plan. He manages to make contact with the outside world. Time for the rescue mission. With Dylan hacking the digital skies, Marucho initiates the most drastic plan in sci-fi history. Delete Bakugan interspace. Not a shutdown, not a graceful evacuation. As Dan's father and Kato race against time to open an emergency access point, Marucho activates the interspace self-destruct sequence, a move with no turning back. The new mission is to escape before the digital explosion engulfs everything. Turmoil, chaos, and screams. Dylan plays his final card. He was a traitor all along, selling out the Brawlers for a fortune cookie and Mag Mel's empty promise of glory. Things get so bad, you'd think a piano might fall from the sky. That's when Spectre and Helios show up out of nowhere like the Gandalfs of this story. They merge with Dan and Drago in a cinematic fusion of raw energy and sheer sheer spectacle. The fusion works, but Drago can barely stand. Spectra and Helios decide to stay behind, facing the final boss alone, while the others flee. The self-destruct sequence is triggered. Interspace turns to dust. Mag-Mel, of course, feeds off the chaos and opens a portal straight to Earth. The result? A dark moon rises in the sky. He has arrived. Mag-Mel decides it's time for a planetary makeover. The population is being sent to the reverse dimension, and the vibe? Definitely end of the world. The only ones left standing are the Brawlers. Just Mag-Mel's kind of crowd. 5 Dreadion Titans drill into Earth like cosmic jackhammers, aiming straight for the planet's core. If they reach it, it's game over. Goodbye Earth, Gundalia, Nethia, Vestal. The entire universe goes out in a chain reaction. The Brawlers split into strike teams, each facing off against their own personal titan. Unlikely alliances form. Even Gundalians and Nethians are hugging it out in the name of survival. In the end, the Titans fall, and Mag-Mel shows up in person with Razanoid, rocking a final boss level look. Mech tokens start popping out of nowhere like he's got an endless stash. The Brawlers respond in kind with triple legendary tier fusions. Marucho, the underestimated genius, spots the loophole. If Dan and Drago can sync up with the key in the portal, they can seal the lunar gate, and wouldn't you know it, they pull it off. Mag-Mel is forced to retreat, but not before dragging Dan and Drago with him. Deep within the reverse dimension, Dan and Drago face a completely unhinged Mag-Mel, now angrier and more chaotic. He's become a pure entity of spite, shaped by the sacred orb. Here, everything works against our heroes. Mag-Mel regenerates, warps the landscape, and spawns endless mech token. It's like cheat codes are on. Dan and Drago take a heavier beating than ever before. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the Brawlers are dealing with yet another wave of chaotic Bakugan. The Titans may be down, but peace is still on vacation. And just when all seems lost, a new energy rises. The combined power of all the Brawlers' partner Bakugans. Drago finally evolves, and thus Fusion Dragonoid is born. A fusion born from the essence of every ally who ever fought alongside the Battle Brawlers. The new Drago turns the tide. The battle evens out. Feeling the pressure, Mag-Mel makes his final move to blow up the reverse dimension, Earth, the universe, everything he can take down with him. But Dan and Drago flip the script again. They redirect the explosion and Mag-Mel is sealed. Mysterious Metagan crashed the celebration. No summoning, no brawler. They've rebelled. Mutations that broke free from their Bakugan creators. They want to wipe out all others and build an empire of their own. Led by Kordagon and Slykorak, these new villains declare all-out war. The first strike hits New Vestroia. The resistance forces Dan and Drago, yes he's back, into a new evolved form, Dragonoid Destroyer. The new beast is colossal, crushing the rogue mech token, but they escape, vowing to return stronger. And while the world celebrates another victory, Dan knows the game never truly ends. Because if there's one thing that's certain in the Bakugan universe, it's that the next big threat is always just around the corner. In the middle of a battle that was already chaotic enough, Guns decides to spice things up. He takes a hit and simply vanishes. No fleeing, no running, no trail. He evaporates, like a cheap party magician's trick. The Battle Brawlers go all in trying to find him, but there's not a trace of the guy. It's like the universe swallowed him whole and burped up silence. Meanwhile, Mira is analyzing the mech token that showed up to stir trouble. Kordagon, Slysarak, Exo Striker, and Mandibor. Each of them is a major headache on their own, but when they fuse into Mectavius Destroyer, we're talking full-blown chronic migraine. The bizarre twist, they appear without needing a Bakugan, mutant DNA according to the data, or maybe just a nasty glitch in the genetic code. Dragonoid Destroyer has his own bag of tricks. With Drago aboard, his power level goes through the roof, and as a bonus, he fires Bakugan from his shoulders, because who needs arms apparently. Meanwhile, in the sinister depths of the Doom dimension, the defeated mech token encounters someone called Wise Man, a mysterious figure who looks like he walked straight out of a generic RPG. He offers them freedom in exchange for revenge against the Battle Brawlers. They accept, obviously, because holding a grudge is way more fun than being reasonable. At last, Wise Man decides to step out of the shadows and hit the airwaves. He's got an announcement to make. He issues a public challenge to the Battle Brawlers. Live from Bakugan City, because if you're going to play the villain, you might as well do it with an audience. Dan and Drago charge into the fight with everything they've got, but the enemy shows up packing the Nonet Bakugan, a monstrous lineup that includes Betadron, Kodakor, Mudabred, and Wharton. These beasts were once sealed away by the original Dragonoid himself. In other words, this grudge runs in the family. During the clash, Reptak starts getting suspicious. There's something oddly familiar about Wise Man's moves. It's a lot like Guns. The battle ends without a clear victor, but the doubt lingers. Has Guns truly vanished, or is he just rocking a new disguise? Jakor is in the middle of ninja training with Shun, trying to look more serious than he really is, when, out of nowhere, Skytrus and Orbium, his former pupils from New Vestroia, make a dramatic entrance. tense. They bring the usual crisis. Their homeland is in danger. Their crew wants to return, and they need Master J-Core as a lucky charm to protect them. But their chat is cut short when Wise Man strikes again. This time, Shun is the target. Plot twist: J-Core teams up with Skytrust and Orbium, forming a ninja trio worthy of their own spin-off. After the battle, the students try to convince J-Core to come with them, but he chooses to stay by Shun's side, because loyalty isn't something you're taught, it's something you show. Skytrust and Orbium leave, but not without learning the true meaning of partnership. Radisson, the grumpiest and nudist Bakugan in the crew, is feeling down. Unlike his teammates, he can't seem to form any combinations. Worse yet, he can't even be launched by the Dragon or Destroyer. Confidence took a walk. Rockstar, the Ventus Bakugan with the personality of a birthday party entertainer, tries to cheer him up, but Raidizin shuts down every attempt with all the grace of a sledgehammer. During Wise Man's next attack, Ballista and Wharton fuse into a hellish duo, and right in the middle of the chaos, Radizin and Rockstar do the unthinkable. They combine. The friendship combination works. It has chemistry. It has power. It has the freshness of a soda commercial. Victory. Secured. Still, the partnership feels more like a short-term contract than a true friendship. Mira, who knows better than to miss an opportunity, makes Rockstar an official team member. After all, sometimes a forced partnership is just what we need to make things work. Mira hits full-on workaholic mode, churning out battle suits like there's no tomorrow. She's got armor for everything: aerial combat, ground ops, probably even one for a picnic, but her body can't keep up with her brain, and she collapses mid-presentation. The diagnosis? Burnout. The prescription? 1 week on airplane mode. With Mira out of commission, Kato calls in a heavy hitter for backup. Runo, yes, the former member of the Battle Brawlers, and she arrives as a specialist in Vestal technology. Naturally, Wise Man seizes the opening and launches an attack. Without Mira to operate the battle suits, the team is in serious trouble, but Runo steps up, and with her help, the suits become true war machines. The tide turns, the villains go down, and Runo is officially reinstated. Experience matters, especially when the punches start flying. And on the horizon, trouble brews again, because with Wise Man in play, peace is just the calm between storms. Runo and Dan decide to visit the famous Bakugan Land, a theme park that was supposed to celebrate the bond between humans and Bakugans. But instead of joy and celebration, what they find is more like the aftermath of a zombie apocalypse. Not a single soul in sight, just silence and an eerie tension hanging in the air. The reason? Widespread panic, triggered by none other than Wise Man, who turned a peaceful place into a realm of fear. While Julie tries, and fails, to deliver a cheerful news report, because let's face it, the park is utterly deserted, Dan and Runo stumble upon a lone Bakugan. This one's bitter, traumatized, and doesn't believe in peaceful coexistence anymore. Even the monsters have been overtaken by fear. Then, like stepping out from behind a theatrical curtain, Wise Man himself appears. He doesn't attack physically, he poisons the air with his words, innuendos, lies, twisted truths, like a soap opera villain with a street psychologist's degree. He spins his web of manipulation with flair. Tension erupts. A skirmish breaks out between the Brawlers and Wise Man's followers, who seem only too happy to watch the world burn. But then comes the wild card. Julie's broadcast, what seemed like just another local news piece, turns into a spark of hope. Her footage strikes a chord with the everyday folks, and some citizens start coming out of hiding to stand with the Brawlers. The tide turns, the resistance grows, and Dan and Runo's victory that day isn't just about winning a fight, it's symbolic. A clear message that the alliance between humans and Bakugans still holds strong. For the first time, Wise Man senses that the people are waking up, and it rattles him. Guns reappears out of nowhere, with no memory whatsoever of his disappearance. The classic amnesiac trope, convenient for the plot. Reptak, half relieved and half suspicious, starts connecting the dots. Wise Man's movements, the precisely timed attacks, the villainous flair straight out of a soap opera. It all feels eerily familiar. Then comes the unmasking moment. Wise Man is none other than Guns himself, or what's left of him. A brooding, dark, empathy-stripped version of Reptak's old partner. The scene takes a dramatic turn, full-on primetime melodrama. Reptak desperately tries to reach any shred of the man he once knew, but all he gets in return is cold disdain. To end the day with a punch to the gut, Wise Man steals the Brawlers' battlesuits and flies off, leaving Reptak shattered and the whole team utterly defenseless. Because disaster loves company, Wise Man wastes no time unveiling the battlesuits, unleashing them like a kid who just unwrapped a new toy set to total destruction mode. The Brawlers, poor guys, they're forced to fight their own tech with about as much advantage as a fish in a desert. Dan almost bites the dust, completely isolated, but a jury-rigged trick using Defendrix's EMP system sparks a golden opportunity. 3 minutes of technical breathing room. Is it enough? Not even close. Despite putting up a hell of a fight, Wise Man Dan slips away once again, smirking, because this was just the trailer. As the team struggles to catch their breath, the non-ats have finally gathered enough energy to resurrect the Mectavius destroyer, and here comes the ultimate moral dilemma. Either the brawlers destroy their own Bakugan partners, or say goodbye to planet Earth. The countdown begins, 12 hours. While the city spirals into panic, each of the heroes faces their own internal collapse. Dan, ever the embodiment of impulse, suggests deploying the Dragonoid destroyer, which only fuels the flames of discord within the group. Amid the chaos, Mira discovers that 30% of the Dragonoid's power remains sealed, and no one knows why. Tension reaches a radioactive peak. Old traumas resurface, unresolved wounds sting anew, and a 12-hour ticking clock echoes in their ears. They decide instantly they won't back down. If they're going down fighting. Mectavius Destroyer returns more monstrous than ever, swatting away the brawlers' attacks like pesky flies. But then comes the turning point. Shun and Marucho unveil their own Mectogen, Thorak and Flytros, born from deep bonds and, truthfully, a creative desperation. With Dragonoid Destroyer now powered up an additional 20%, they form a trio to be reckoned with. The fearsome trio forces Mectavius into retreat. It's not a final victory, but it's a win. Bakugan City breathes easier, even though everyone knows there's still that mysterious 10% of hidden power lurking, like the kind of secret everyone knows will eventually blow up. Aerogan couldn't stand it anymore, repeating the same moves like a ninja hamster on an endless wheel. Top-tier jumper, rising star, but with zero patience to begin with. Sick of the same old training routine, he went looking for a real fight. But surprise, Bakugan City was on lockdown thanks to the threat of some guy named Wise Man, who, let's be honest, was only wise in name. On his quest for action, he runs into Runo. Yes, that same Runo from the old days, now partnerless and with even less patience for rookies. Their chemistry is as unlikely as ketchup on toast. But somehow, it works, naturally, just as they decide to train together up in the mountains. Who shows up? That's right, Wise Man himself, along with his over-the-top non-ats. Dan and the brawlers do their best to save the day, but Aerogan is torn between making a run for it or striking a hero pose. In the heat of battle, he finally gets it. Fighting isn't about putting on a show, it's about protecting others, and he proves it in the most stylish way possible. With a jump so outrageous it'd make a professional parkour athlete cry in the shower, Drago seizes the moment, lands the final blow, and Aerogan heads home with his head held high, and a brand new sense of purpose in his heart. Shun, always with that I'm more ninja than you vibe, sends Skytrus and Orbium on a recon mission. And what do you know? The two actually locate Wise Man's base inside a volcano, because obviously no self-respecting villain hides anywhere less dramatic. But the glory doesn't last. They're captured by the Nonnet, making their comeback with more flair than a boy band reunion tour. The brawlers rush to the rescue, only to face a surprise nobody asked for. The Mectogen are back, bulkier than ever, and of course, unstoppable. In the middle of the chaos, a prisoner shows up, looking exactly like Wise Man. But, as any good soap opera would teach us, appearances can be deceiving. The truth hits like schoolyard gossip. Wise Man pulls off the mask and, boom, it's Corrigan, the intergalactic imposter. As reality crumbles like a sandcastle at high tide, Guns wakes up at the bottom of a cave with a brain working worse than airport Wi-Fi. Corrigan shows up, all talk, and reveals he was born from Guns' own negative energy and envy. And he didn't stop there. He stole his appearance, his memories, and, just for kicks, his dignity too. Meanwhile, the world outside is pure chaos. The Mectogen are wreaking havoc. Reptak is drowning in guilt for ever doubting his partner, and the brawlers are caught up in a fight that feels like a championship final. Guns rejoins the team, but the tension is thicker than a condo board meeting. Corrigan, the ultimate narcissist, finally lays it all out. He wants to absorb all the battle energy and become, well, the god of destruction. The Nonets realize they've been used as extras and try to rebel. Corrigan kicks everyone to the curb and announces the apocalypse. Corrigan finally achieves his ultimate form, Mectavius Destroyer. A name that sounds like a final boss in a video game, and it lives up to it. Not only does he banish the traitorous Nonets to a dimensional exile, but he also morphs into a war machine of pure devastation, capable of wiping out entire islands like blowing out birthday candles. The brawlers are in panic mode. They throw everything they've got at him, but it's like trying to tickle a tank in a fit of brilliance and rage. Guns crafts his own version of the Wise Man, powered purely by hatred, because if you're going to cosplay, make it theatrical. And the icing on the cake? Mectavius Destroyer decides to banish everyone to the Doom dimension. With a swipe of dark magic, any remaining hope vanishes into thin air. And it's in the Doom dimension that the brawlers end up, more lost than a tourist without GPS. The place drains everything: energy, hope, and the will to live. Drago tries to use his powers to get everyone out, but the dimension is more unyielding than a nutritionist's diet plan. Meanwhile, back in the real world, the Nonets make one last stand against Mactavius Destroyer, only to be crushed one by one, fueling the villain's growing power. Betatron, Ballistia, and the rest become nothing more than nightmare fuel. In the dimensional prison, Professor Wharton appears with his final gambit, the Stream of Time, a temporal vortex capable of sending the Brawlers back to the past. Sounds crazy? It is. But it's the only hope left to stop Mactavius from annihilating everything. In a move that can only be described as the interdimensional equivalent of let's go full crazy mode, the Brawlers dive headfirst into the time stream. What was supposed to be a chill ride between realities turns into an emotional roller coaster. Of course, they're not going solo on this trip. Betatron and Guns, now fully suited up in their conceptual villain cosplay as Wise Man 2, are hot on their heels all the way to the Doom dimension, ready to air out some serious grievances and settle unfinished business. And when people fight with that much history and fury behind them, sparks fly. The battles are brutal, but not just for the sake of throwing punches. There's catharsis, there's reckoning. Every solid hit helps exorcise a past trauma. At the end of the line, or rather the stream, the team lands straight into the past, right before Mactavius Destroyer is about to unleash the apocalypse on Bakugan City. The irony? They've got a second chance. The urgency? Nothing special, just the end of the world knocking at their door. Bakugan City, take 2, but this time with spoilers from the future and fire in their eyes. Mactavius Destroyer barely starts causing trouble, and the Brawlers are already coming at him with a surgically precise plan. It's like watching a game replay. You already know exactly where the villain is going to slip, and as every great storyline needs reinforcements, in come Mira and Julie, geared up to the teeth with cutting-edge tech. Dan and Guns, who could barely share the same air before, now fight side by side like they've always been the dynamic duo. And to put the cherry on this redemption sundae, Betatron, yes, that Betatron, joins the fray as an ally. With Chromopods synced up with Dragonoid Destroyer, the battlefield erupts into a visual spectacle worthy of a final shonen anime showdown. Mactavius Destroyer unleashes an attack that wipes an entire island off the map, because subtlety was never really his thing. But then comes the twist. Dragonoid Destroyer begins drawing energy from all of humanity. Picture it, a massive USB plugged into the whole world. The result? A golden transformation that makes any Super Saiyan look like a budget cosplay. Julie broadcasts everything live, like a cosmic war correspondent, and the world finally grasps the gravity of this battle. It's more than just a fight, it's the embodiment of the alliance between humans and Bakugan, a planetary synergy that gives Dragonoid Destroyer the boost to become a god in the arena. As the skies ignite with this newfound power, it becomes clear that the end is near, of an era, a threat, and perhaps even a cycle. And if you thought that was the peak, hold on tight. At the climax of it all, the Dragonoid Destroyer becomes the stage for a mythical appearance, Genesis Dragonoid. Yes, the original, the one that started it all. And he's not just there to look pretty. He arrives with razor-sharp words, and a presence so powerful it makes Mactavius Destroyer seem like just another needy villain. The truth hits like a slap to the face. The evil Mechtogan were born from rejection, created by fury. While the Brawlers grew stronger through real bonds, Mactavius became a pit of bitterness and isolation. The battle plays out like an emotional manifesto, and when Mactavius Destroyer finally falls, it's not just the villain that vanishes, it's the whole cycle of hatred breaking apart. And like a long-awaited promise, Dan and Guns finally face off in a friendly battle, not as rivals, but as brothers in arms. Drago and Dan walk off side by side, leaving behind a legacy of friendship and battles that shaped an entire universe. The next generation, their turn to fight, literally.